the Industrial Revolution of the Mage Lord. Greetings, fellow multiversal adventurers. It's an honor to have you back in this saga that has us all hooked. Official channel statement: this story is 100% epic fiction. So please don't attempt real magic, the results aren't guaranteed and insurance won't cover it. The rights to this masterpiece belong entirely to its brilliant original author. We are just a barge sharing it with you. Do you want to keep being part of this amazing community? Join our ninja army of subscribers on YouTube and give this content a like. And for true fans, our Patreon has exclusive ninjutsu waiting for you. Chapter 426, Eternal Night Ruins, Part 2. Black, his body charred black, suddenly rose from the dead, startling everyone on the airship. White, his eyes red and his mood downcast, exclaimed in surprise, "By the necromancer, your transformed form withstood that strange red light attack." Black grunted hoarsely and twitched again as the power of the transformation faded. He finally began to feel the pain from the severe burns, and cried out in agony, unable to hold back any longer. White hurriedly retrieved the last few doses of restorative potion and clotting dressings, carefully applying them to his entire body. The last surviving refugee guide on the airship, crouched by the observation window of the gondola, suddenly cried out in alarm, "Master Wizard!" Look down. Several people gathered near the window and peered down, discovering that a natural clearing in the dense forest not far from their recent camp had suddenly become densely populated with people. A rough count revealed dozens of them. They stood in silence, their heads tilted upward as they stared at the airship, which had already lifted dozens of meters into the air. They looked identical to the skinned monsters that had attacked them earlier. Just 3 skinned monsters alone had forced a high-level spellcaster Eye of Illusion, Duncan, whose disability had crippled his ability to cast spells, and 3 mid-level necromancers to fight with all their might. They barely escaped, having lost 3 guides to the deaths. And the sudden appearance of dozens of such formidable and cunning enemies within the dense forest was enough to break them into cold sweat. Eye of Illusion gripped the pod's armrests tightly, his voice strained as he spoke. Fortunately they can't fly, otherwise we'd really." Before he could finish, a masked figure on the ground suddenly moved, pointing toward the airship in the sky. 2 men beside him immediately formed thick spears from black water in their hands. They assumed a throwing stance and took a running start, their arms suddenly expanding. The 2 hurled black water spears whizzed towards the airship like lightning, their momentum undiminished even from dozens of meters above. In an instant, they pierced the airship's outer bladder above the pod, then pierced through the other side, sending it careening towards the ground. The internal split airbags were clearly damaged and leaking. The airship halted its ascent with a slight tremor, barely stabilizing and floating in mid-air. Even with Whitey's power levers set to their maximum output, it could only manage a slow, level flight. Oh no! They're attacking the airship's airbags. Duncan, uncaring for his wounds, struggled to his feet and attempted to operate again. He had to stop the enemy from throwing spears. If more than half of the 6 separate airbags were damaged, the airship, with only 6 sets, would lose all power and plummet to the ground. The Eye of Illusion took a deep breath, deciding he couldn't let his teacher go down alone to stall for time. He also raised his hand to open the hatch. Michelle, slowly waking up, suddenly reminded him weakly, "Magic guns. We brought 3, yes. Magic guns. Even more powerful than the enemy's black crystal thorns, transcendental magical weapons with greater penetration and range." The Eye of Illusion turned around and immediately spotted the silver metal spears hanging from the pod's weapon rack. He rushed over to grab them, tossing one into White's hands and reloading the magazine according to the method he had memorized. Honestly, every member of the expedition team in the pod was somewhat resistant to the idea of using such a weapon. Such a terrifying weapon, easily wielded by mortals incapable of confronting spellcasters head-on, was truly unacceptable to them. Especially for a genius mage like the Eye of Illusion, who appeared gentle and polite to ordinary people, but was actually extremely arrogant, forcing him to admit from the bottom of his heart that a magic gun could surpass the magic he had painstakingly mastered was like being publicly burned at the stake. The magic gun felt cool and slightly heavy in his hands, but at that moment, it gave the 2 people in the pod a sense of security and hope. The Eye of Illusion vaguely remembered that this Type III magic gun was different from the Type II sniper gun he had seen Wayne use. Its long barrel lacked an alchemical sight, meaning that he and White, who were to operate it, would have to rely on their utterly unpracticed marksmanship and aiming skills to return fire on the enemies below. Another javelin whizzed towards him. Duncan barely managed to muster a trace of magic power, gathering 2 missiles and narrowly deflecting them before they could pierce the airship's outer shell. However, his magic power, already nearly depleted from his transfiguration spell, trembled all over, and the result of forcibly drawing on magic power was that he could barely stand. The Eye of Illusion immediately raised his spear by the pod window, clumsily aiming it at the enemy below. Without hesitation, he pulled the trigger. With a soft click, the bullet blasted out with a faint flash of white light. Whether it was due to exceptional performance in a critical moment, or the already densely packed enemy formation below, this completely random shot somehow managed to strike a hideous creature. Although the impact was unknown, the creature visibly shook and fell to the ground, motionless. The magic spear could actually penetrate the strange skin that even high-level combat techniques could not penetrate. The enemies gathered below were also visibly startled, scattering from their fallen comrades and attempting to hide in the shade of the trees. A few remained frozen, their heads still raised beneath their crystal visors, attempting to concentrate their black water lance to bring down the airship. The Eye of Illusion snorted coldly, raised his hand, and fired again. His unpredictable shooting technique immediately revealed its true form, with a bullet landing on the empty, 3-meter-wide field, barely registering a single bullet. White, a step slower than him, had just cocked his rifle, but due to intense nervousness and unfamiliarity with the weapon, his finger seemed welded to the trigger and he couldn't even lift it. With a click, he emptied the magazine in an unknown direction, but missed a single enemy. Calm down. Slow down and shoot one by one. We don't have much ammunition, the Eye of Illusion warned, pulling a spare from his pouch and tossing it into the necromancer's arms, leaving him to frantically reload. White finally found his rhythm as he attempted a second round of shooting. Accidentally, he shattered a metal canister strapped to one of the strange figures with a bang. This somehow triggered a violent explosion and fire. Flames instantly rose from behind the enemy, engulfing him completely. After a few seconds of blazing, only a dark, yellowish pool of something unclear, whether oil or pus, remained. The bullets can detonate the canisters of black water, the Eye of Illusion exclaimed in delight. Aim for the large canisters behind them. They're extremely flammable, practically indistinguishable from dragon flame powder. Seeing the magic gun's counterattack was effective, even the severely wounded Michel struggled to his feet, grabbed his last remaining spear, and leaned against the window, aiming down with all his might. Under the relentless barrage of bullets, the skinned figure on the ground finally realized the strength of the airship's counterattack. Silently, they retreated, disappearing into the deep, dense forest. Finally getting a chance to breathe, the group halted their attack, manipulating the cables to pull the damaged split airbag back into the cabin, repairing it with a rubber patch they had prepared long ago. After reinflating it, the airship finally regained its power and staggered upwards into the sky. Chapter 427, Eternal Night Ruins, Part 2. Having narrowly escaped the clutches of these bizarre enemies, the expedition team dared not land to rest at night. Relying on the dwindling fuel in their airship, they flew north, heading straight for the edge of the frozen sea in the tundra. The Eye of Illusion handed a can of food, heated on a portable stove, to the last surviving refugee guide and asked gravely, to prevent those strange enemies from being drawn to the snowy mountain camp, we may not return by our original route, but we won't abandon you. Once we complete our exploration mission, will you return with us to Spark City at the foot of the Divine Spine Mountains? The young guide accepted the food in silence, nodded, and muffled his words. If even powerful wizards like you can't easily defeat those monsters, and our settlement is completely defenseless, I am willing to follow you back to your city. That magical weapon that can kill the skinned monsters will also allow me to avenge my people and brothers. Of the 4 refugees Elder Woolley had dispatched to guide the expedition, one of them had died in battle, his own blood brother. Duncan leaned against the observation window of the pod, pointed to the open area that suddenly appeared in the north direction, and said in surprise, "Is that the ice sea in the permafrost zone?" Everyone looked into the distance and realized that the airship was about to drive out of the endless wasteland and dense forest without realizing it, and not far ahead was a barren land with almost no grass, like a vast white desert. The guide nodded and said, "Yes, the ice sea is ahead. Although it looks like a vast and boundless snowfield, it is actually an underground sea covered by an ice layer more than 10 meters thick. When we fly deeper, we can also see the sea springs. The sea water will break through the ice layer and spray out of the ground, forming a huge ice cave with a diameter of hundreds of meters." The astrologer, whose body had recovered a lot, frowned and reminded, "Teacher, The airship's gas fuel is running out. If we can't find the remains of the Kingdom of Eternal Night, we must choose a suitable temporary base and set up a magic network teleportation array to demand supplies from Spark City. Michelle and Blake, who were more seriously injured, also needed to get more magic potions to ensure that their injuries would not continue to worsen on the return journey. As long as they insisted on returning to Spark City, they would naturally heal quickly under the joint treatment of the medical alchemy beasts and the Academy of Magic Sciences. 3 days. 3 more days of flying deep into the ICC. We still have enough fuel for 5 days of continuous flight. We don't need to land at night to save fuel. Although the ICC was endless, the advantage was an unobstructed view without any ground obstruction. Those skin monsters who had been following them all along couldn't hide in the shadows and launch another surprise attack. Flying over the ICC without any landmarks, the exploration team had to constantly rotate flight directions, repeatedly checking the compass's indication of true north. It wasn't until the afternoon of the 3rd day that White, on observation duty, vaguely spotted a strange ridge of terrain protruding from the ice in the distance ahead. Mr. Duncan. Look, White pointed at a pile of white rocks rising from the ice several miles away. Could that be a sea swell? We could find a flat area with some elevation there and set up a temporary base for the teleportation array. As the airship patiently approached, they realized that what lay below them wasn't a sea swell at all, but a massive sinkhole several times larger than the sea swell's ice cave, resembling a massive volcanic eruption. The sea surged at the bottom, pounding against the circular walls. The nearly pitch-black water was impossible to see to the bottom, creating a terrifying sight from high above. The airship carefully adjusted its course and found a flat surface for a gentle landing. Duncan and the expedition team emerged from the pod and approached the edge of the sinkhole for a closer inspection. This definitely isn't a sea swell, the young guide explained, shaking his head like a rattle. The presence of a sea swell indicates the presence of hydrothermal springs beneath the ICC in this area. The high-temperature water gushing out must be able to melt the thick ice, but the massive pit before them, several miles in diameter, clearly couldn't have been melted by a hydrothermal spring alone. It was more likely the result of a natural collapse following a devastating earthquake. Duncan gazed at the deep, surging waters beneath his feet, pondered for a moment, and decisively declared, "Let's set up a teleportation array here. After all, the terrain around the pit is elevated, making it easier for us to observe and warn of any nearby enemies." Following his instructions, everyone hurriedly retrieved the teleportation array devices from the airship's pods, set up their makeshift tents, and then began constructing the magic network teleportation array in the largest, broad-roofed tent. They busied themselves until near dusk, when the rhythmic sound of the tide suddenly emanated from the massive pit. They hurried to the edge to investigate, and discovered that the water had ceased its churning, slowly receding. How bizarre. This underground ICC actually has normal tides, and the entire sea level is dropping so strangely. The Eye of Illusion couldn't help but marvel at this as it peered down. Only in this remote, untouched wilderness, far from the southern border, could they witness such bizarre sights, making the journey's hardships and dangers worthwhile. Gradually, however, everyone began to notice something amiss at the bottom of the pit. As the tide receded faster and faster, a vast expanse of jagged rocks slowly emerged from the once dark, deep cave floor. The rocks were unexpectedly regular in shape, like stone pillars polished by a craftsman. "That's not a reef," Duncan gazed intently down. "The stone pillars exposed at the bottom of this pit are clearly man-made. It looks like the base of a tower." As he finished speaking, the Eye of Illusion and the astrologer trembled in disbelief and wonder. Could this be the ruins of the legendary city of Eternal Night? But weren't these ruins destroyed by a demonic invasion? How could they have sunk into the frozen Earth Sea? Wait. Mr. Asdalin had mentioned that the city of Eternal Night first experienced an overwhelming natural disaster, only to be exploited by the demons and invaded en masse, ultimately leading to its utter destruction. But Mr. Asdalin, a lowly hybrid, had lived on the outskirts of the city of Eternal Night. When the disaster struck, he strangely received advance warning and, with the help of his family, fled the area. This very likely meant that the disaster wasn't natural at all, but man-made. This so-called natural disaster, was the entire city simply sinking into the Earthsea overnight? Chapter 428, Earthsea Disaster. Everyone stood at the edge of the enormous sinkhole, stunned for a long moment, unable to recover. The Eye of Illusion swallowed hard and asked in a hoarse voice, "Teacher, the tide has completely receded. Should we go down and take a look? Before Duncan could reply, the astrologer spoke in a deep voice, we can't go down rashly. Not to mention the unknown dangers that may exist in the ruins, the airship's fuel is running low. We must first seek assistance from Spark City and then report the discovery of the suspected Eternal Night ruins to Lord Harvey. Duncan pondered for a moment, then nodded in approval. Yes, the ruins are at the bottom of the pit. The tide will naturally rise and fall from day to night, and they will naturally surface. Let's not act rashly tonight. Report the situation first and then make a decision. This way, they could also arrange for personnel to be stationed near the pit to observe and calculate the frequency and timing of the tide, to avoid any accidents if they actually descended into the ruins at the bottom of the pit. The Eye of Illusion muttered quietly, if the city lord knew about this, he would definitely not agree to let us go directly. Given his cautious nature, he would most likely send a few exploration-type alchemy beasts. Then we would have no chance to see the legendary ruins of the Kingdom of Eternal Night with our own eyes. After dinner, Harvey returned to his study and office on the second floor of the castle as usual, preparing to stay up late to deal with the municipal affairs that had accumulated in recent days. Just after reviewing a few piled-up documents, he heard a sharp beeping sound from the instrument in the magic brain center. This was not the forum message that he usually ignored, but the information from the exploration team that he had always been paying attention to. According to the agreement before the team set out, the messages sent at noon every day were normal daily reports, and would be received and reported by Harvey's personal guards. Messages sent back at non-fixed time periods would be directly transmitted to Harvey's magic brain center, bypassing the on-duty personnel. As Dallin, who normally remained by Harvey's side even when on standby to recharge, instantly lit up with a blazing fire. He stalked from the wall where he had been quietly standing to the magic brain, turning on the device before Harvey could even stand. Wolf Walker, Lord City Lord, urgent report. We have discovered what appear to be ruins of the Kingdom of Eternal Night in a region called the Ice Sea, deep within the permafrost. Upon seeing this blunt message, as Dallin froze for a moment, subconsciously turning to look at his Lord City Lord, Harvey sighed and whispered, you go and communicate with him, alchemist soul. I am Asdalin, Lord City Lord, I am with you now. How are you doing? Are the enemies still following the unknown attack we encountered a few days ago? Wolf Walker, fortunately, the airship is too fast, and they can't catch up at all. The frozen sea is endless, and it is easy to find the enemy's traces. We can still deal with it and dodge for the time being. Duncan truthfully reported the basic conditions of the two wounded in the team, and asked for an additional batch of magic potions to relieve injuries and pain. Somewhat beyond Harvey's expectation, he took the initiative to ask for an additional batch of ammunition for the magic gun, or the Dragon Flame edition with greater range and power. It seems that these gentlemen spellcasters, after encountering mysterious and powerful enemies, have finally realized the difference in consumption between their own magic power and magic weapons, and are willing to put aside their prejudices and embrace the science of magic. Harvey nodded, raised his hand to summon his personal guard, and ordered him to go to the alchemy laboratory immediately, and let Chris, who was on standby at all times, prepare to send return fuel and supplies to the exploration team. Alchemy Soul, next, how do you plan to confirm that the ruins of Eternal Night are in the sinkhole? Wolf Walker, naturally, we'll land at the bottom of the pit and explore the ruins during the ebb and flow of the tide. We'll try to bring back some debris and use the teleportation array to return to Spark City for you to identify. During this brief exchange, Harvey and Asdarin immediately understood the general situation of the Ice Sea pit and the unknown ruins where the team was. Asdarin was silent for a moment, then sighed with some regret. My lord, I don't think there's any need to verify it too much. In fact, apart from the city of Evernight, there are no other wizarding kingdoms established by humans on the frozen sea, although Asdarin, a mixed blood, had lost many memories after being trapped in the Amber Crystal for hundreds of years, leaving only a few impressive fragments of the city of Evernight where he once lived. There was generally no deviation. Harvey asked in confusion, the city of Eternal Night is built on the ice of the sea? How did you do it? Is it a city built with huge ice blocks? Asdalin shook his head and smiled bitterly, not really. The city is built on a huge island that rises from the bottom of the sea. The island is made up of extremely hard rocks. Our ancestors directly cut the natural rocks and built the city with the island as the base. I see. But this is really too much trouble. Harvey still didn't understand. Why did your ancestors and family have to spend a lot of manpower and materials to build a city standing alone on the ice sea in the depths of the northern wilderness, far away from the human homeland? Is there something there? Before he finished speaking, his body suddenly stiffened, and then he looked at Asdalon with wide eyes. Outpost? That's a huge outpost city. Used to guard the front line of the human race, to monitor alien enemies from the center of the continent, in advance, an outpost city built and occupied entirely by combat spellcasters. Specifically to resist and monitor the movements of alien races. Unexpectedly, long before the Union, human spellcasters had already shouldered the arduous task of defending their tribe and fighting against alien races. Duncan silently closed the crystal screen of his magical brain instrument, turned to look at the members of the exploration team guarding him, and smiled softly. As you expected. Lord Harvey does not approve of us personally descending to the bottom of the pit to explore the interior of the Eternal Night ruins. The Eye of Illusion curled its lips, as if it had known this would happen. See. The Lord City Lord is so cautious. We've risked our lives to get here, so what else should we not dare to try? Duncan coughed twice, glared at his outspoken student, and stood up. Go to the Magic Network teleportation array. We're preparing to receive supplies from Spark City. The temporary magical brain teleportation array hummed, and a huge pile of crates and metal containers suddenly emerged from the center of the teleportation array, several meters square. Duncan walked forward without saying a word and personally opened a supply box. Huh? This isn't the airship's fuel tank. The Eye of Illusion froze, staring blankly at the neatly stacked array devices and magical materials in the box. Isn't this the construction materials for another teleportation array? Duncan nodded, picked up the complete set of array blueprints that came with the box, and said in a deep voice, after repeated discussions with the city lord and the chief advisor, we plan to use the materials from the teleportation array supplies to build a small energy gathering array right here, and then construct a large magic network teleportation array that can provide a stable transmission path. Chapter 429 Exploration Base and Permanent Fortifications. After the low hum of the magic network teleportation array activating, the space at the center of the array suddenly distorted briefly, and a tall, human-like figure composed of metal and machinery appeared at the center. Mr. Asdalon. You have come here in person, the Eye of Illusion cried out in surprise. The soul fire in Asdalon's pupils, which had been extinguished, slowly ignited. After a long pause, he spoke, for such a long distance, two-way transmission, I naturally need to enter the transmission channel first to test the stability. If the magic network's transmission channel fluctuated, alchemical beings like him could at least wait for rescue. Soul beacons scattered throughout the magic network space could be quickly located by Harvey, the creator. At most, they could be collected and replaced with a new body. Duncan stepped forward and smiled. The city lord asked you to come and oversee the construction of the exploration base. Asdalon let out a rare wry laugh. He turned sideways, raised his hand, and grabbed from the void in the center of the magic circle, pulling out a tall, thin, pale figure. It was Harvey, controlling his soul puppet, who had also teleported here personally. City Lord? This is simply too risky. We haven't explored this place thoroughly yet, and there may still be unknown dangers. Harvey awkwardly moved the puppet's limbs, then laughed. It's just a puppet. You're the ones taking the real risk. You're much braver than me. As he stepped out of the teleportation array, the makeshift small energy gathering array behind him suddenly erupted with a violent surge of magical energy, and the array once again sprang into full gear. Vivid humanoid figures appeared one after another in the center of the array, followed by a vast array of supplies. The city lord had actually brought an entire engineering team with him. Many ordinary engineers had never experienced a continental-level teleportation array before, and upon arrival, they knelt on the ground in agony, retching uncontrollably. The few who remained resilient were dizzy and unable to stand for long periods of time. The accompanying medical personnel quickly unloaded various potions from their briefcases and distributed them to everyone. The dizziness caused by riding the continental teleportation array is similar to the flight sickness caused by riding an airship. An oral soothing medication will suffice. A doctor, clearly a hybrid elf, approached Wyatt and asked, "Where are the two injured members of the exploration team? Let's treat their injuries first, and once they're stable, we'll transport them back to the city via the teleportation array for treatment." Overjoyed, White quickly led the medical team back to the airship's pod to check on Blake and Mitchell's injuries. Finally, the group that emerged from the teleportation array was a group that reassured everyone present. Battle-hardened Northern Army soldiers, commanded by officers who were bloodline warriors. They numbered 2 battalions, nearly 300 strong. Duncan breathed a sigh of relief and whispered to Harvey, "If I hadn't experienced the attack of the strange enemy, I would still think that the ability of the spellcaster is far beyond these ordinary soldiers under your command, but now, after experiencing a series of thrilling adventures, the Master of Illusion finally realized that the strength of an individual cannot compete with the power of the collective in some aspects. In the absence of a leap in the level of life, the spellcaster, who is also a mortal body, cannot compare with a human wave tactics endowed with magical technology." Ha smiled and soothed, "I came here to discuss this very matter with you. I have reason to suspect that the skinned monsters who attacked you might be the alien enemies rumored to have come from the center of the continent." Upon hearing this, the Eye of Illusion slapped his thigh in deep regret. "Had we known this, we should have done our utmost to retrieve one of these monsters' bodies. That way, we could at least know their true identities." As he spoke, the engineering team directed the alchemists to set up a temporary camp. The Northern Army soldiers dispersed into small groups, some on guard duty, some assisting the engineers in mapping the surrounding area, and some continuing to meet follow-up personnel at the teleportation array. All work proceeded smoothly and with impeccable efficiency. It seemed that with Harvey's arrival, even in the depths of the wasteland thousands of miles from human territory, everyone felt a sense of security and support, unfazed by the prospect of exploring this unfamiliar land, surrounded by enemies. Harvey stood in front of the conference table, staring at the quickly drawn simple map of the surrounding area, frowning and analyzing. "Let's put the exploration of the ruins at the bottom of the pit aside for now. Our first task is to quickly establish a permanent outpost here." He raised his hand and pointed to the center of the map. This huge pit covered an area comparable to half of the frontier territory. He continued in a deep voice, "The ancient wizard ancestors who built the city here to monitor the movements of alien races in the north must have also determined that this vast ice field has a wide view and is a necessary buffer zone between the center of the continent and the human kingdom in the south. Since it is a natural terrain advantage, their successors can naturally continue to use it." As Dallin said with some worry, "But this place is too far from our base camp. The amount of magical energy required just to send this small amount of supplies and personnel through the teleportation array is comparable to the energy consumption of a magical arsenal. Maintaining the operation of this permanent outpost is truly a bottomless pit." Harvey nodded in agreement, but his tone was unquestionable. "Even if it costs more manpower and resources, we must do it. For this reason, I am even willing to delay the summer offensive against the southern countries, and prioritize the active defense plan in the north." He paused, summoned the engineering director in charge of this area, unfolded a detailed construction drawing, and smiled at everyone. "Also, I don't intend to transport all the supplies from Spark City thousands of miles away. We should naturally save on what we can by using local materials." The Eye of Illusion was stunned. "Use local materials? Lord City Lord. This vast ice plain is barren. We can't just fish out the fragments of the ruins of the City of Eternal Night from the bottom of the pit and reuse them, right?" The bearded engineering supervisor, clearly a native of the wasteland, burst into laughter and stamped the solid ground. "Mr. Spellcaster, can't you see? We're covered in materials. Ice, ice." Harvey looked around, noticing everyone's stunned expressions. He then slowly smiled and said, "Yes, I plan to cut directly into the ice beneath us. Using this solid ice, which has remained unmelted for millions of years on the frozen sea, I'll build an equally sturdy exploration base." At Harvey's nod, the engineering supervisor pointed to the base construction blueprints and began to describe them in detail. The base would be located at the edge of the pit, with defensive walls and security bunkers on 3 sides. The interior would not require a large area, but it would include temporary living quarters for soldiers, workers, and technicians, food and material warehouses, weapons and equipment depots, and most importantly, the energy focusing array and continental teleportation array. A powered elevator controlled by an alchemical device would also be set up at the edge of the pit to facilitate subsequent descents into the depths of the ruins for exploration. How long will such a large-scale construction project take? Duncan felt the constant presence of those masked monsters around him, and he felt uneasy. Harvey confidently said, "Building a base out of solid ice would only take 3 days. This excellent building material doesn't even require the drying time required by cement concrete." Chapter 430 Archaeological Operation. Harvey and Asdalin stood side by side at the edge of the massive sinkhole, watching the construction team busily completing the final adjustments to the power elevator. Now I'm 100% certain this is indeed the remains of the City of Eternal Night, as Dallin sighed, sighing. These massive stone pillars and broken foundations sunk into the sea are clearly built from frost rock, a type found only in the frozen sea. I can't be mistaken. Harvey was also quite impressed, but couldn't help but wonder, how did your ancestor view it? They didn't resort to trickery with solid ice like I did, they used genuine, mind stone, and without the aid of a large number of alchemy beasts. It was incredible to think about it. Arslan chuckled bitterly. My lord, he said, the wizard family I come from had immortal vassalage equivalent to an army. Furthermore, it was the final days of the Dragon War, and many wizarding organizations held large numbers of enslaved people. A new city could be built simply by piling up people. Harvey curled his lips and dropped the subject. He had always disdained such rotten, outdated production methods. Duncan hurried over with 2 students, touched his chest, and saluted Harvey. Your Excellency, the elevator has been commissioned. This evening at low tide. I, on behalf of the exploration team, request permission for the first exploration of the ruins. Harvey paused. Didn't I tell you? Let the small wolf spider beasts go down first to explore the route. Only after confirming there are no problems will we consider sending anyone else. My lord, wolf spider beasts operating in large groups could easily inadvertently destabilize the ruins' internal structure. A landslide would be troublesome. Arslan, in a rare moment, objected to Harvey's caution. In reality, the ruins had been submerged in the sea for so long, eroding under the ravages of the tides. Even the sturdiest pillars and foundations had become riddled with holes and decayed like rotten wood. Harvey pondered for a moment, then reluctantly spread his hands. All right, I approve this exploration, but there's one request. Your Excellency, please feel free to ask. We already have our fair share of exploration. Harvey chuckled and pointed at himself. The request is, take me with you. The elevator wobbled and slowly descended, trembling slightly before landing steadily at the bottom of the pit. Harvey, controlling his puppet, emerged first from the elevator and stepped onto the rocky surface of the pit, still slippery and wet even after the tide receded. The tides only last less than 2 hours, so we shouldn't be too aggressive in our exploration plan. There are bound to be many areas of the ruins still flooded. If we're truly impassable, there's no need to force it. The Eye of Illusion was about to tease Harvey about his excessive caution when it suddenly fixed its gaze and pointed to the deep waters not far away. What's that? Everyone followed his finger and saw several fluorescent green figures suddenly appear in the bottomless waters at the edge of the reef. They moved so quickly through the water that they vanished in a flash, leaving only phantom traces of light before disappearing into the countless holes in the reef beneath the island. Soon, however, several more fluorescent green figures swam by, seemingly more numerous than before. This time, everyone could finally see them clearly. They were actually fish, their bodies shimmering with a faint fluorescent green hue. A sudden realization dawned on Azdarin. If my memory hasn't been tampered with, these must be the glow-scaled fish, a species unique to the ice sea. He pointed at the school of fluorescent fish swimming rapidly through the water, his tone tinged with the joy of regaining a long-lost memory. These fish move with the ebb and flow of the Earth-sea tide. During high tide, they rise close to the ice to feed, and when the tide recedes, they retreat back into the crevices of the reefs to take shelter. Azdarin recalled that during the annual breeding season, the glow-scaled fish would gather in groups of tens of thousands, their immense height piercing even the thick ice, allowing fishermen on the surface to be clearly seen from miles away. It seems these luminous fish have used the sunken Eternal Night ruins as a reef for shelter. As they chatted, they approached the remains of a building closest to the edge of the ruins, which appeared to be the most intact. It resembled several enormous diamond-shaped stone pillars, cut and pieced together. Though its surface was covered in barnacles and coral seaweed, it remained remarkably smooth, a testament to the masterful craftsmanship of its builders centuries ago. This is the oil storage room, Arslan confirmed after carefully examining it. The ice sea lacks trees and coal for lighting and heating, but the ice whales perfectly compensate for these deficiencies. This vast population of whales, widespread throughout the underground ice sea, not only provided the City of Eternal Night with a vast supply of long-burning whale oil, but even their massive, sun-dried skeletons served as supplementary fuel, erected within the city like giant torches, illuminating the surroundings. Each member carefully entered through the broken stone gate, descending a short staircase through which the still bubbling seawater flowed. The illuminating magic stones, held high in their hands, immediately illuminated the interior of the oil storage room. The empty interior seemed vast. It seemed as if only the roof and a corner of the building had been affected by the landslide. Several broken stone pillars had fallen to one side, and the stone roof had half collapsed, letting in the dusk light. Oil storage room? It doesn't look like there's any oil stored there. The eye of illusion rubbed the ground, which had turned green from the seawater. There are many protective array patterns carved into the ground, but they don't seem to be able to withstand this terrifying landslide, as Dallin nodded. The oil storage room needs to be completely isolated from fire sources. It's not surprising that a protective array has been set up here. Harvey, however, felt something was amiss. He lowered his head, pondering for a long time as he gazed at the array pattern beneath his feet. He looked around and realized that none of the spellcasters present had the same deep knowledge of array drawing as he did. Activate a few more illumination stones so I can fully discern the entire structure of the formation. Harvey slowly circled the formation's complex patterns, stopping suddenly near the center of the oil storage room. As Dallin followed his gaze and saw him staring at a patch of seaweed and moss at his feet, his brow furrowed in thought. The impatient eye of illusion was about to ask when Harvey suddenly reached down and tore off the seaweed beneath his feet, revealing a dull gem beneath. It was perfectly round, the size of a fist, and firmly embedded in the stone floor of the hall. The energy-gathering magic stone of the protective array. The astrologer couldn't help but step forward to examine it more closely, but he had no clue what it was. I've never seen a magic stone like this before, but it looks like its stored magic power has been exhausted. Harvey shook his head and suddenly stepped directly on the round gem. Suddenly, a tremor echoed from the ground, as if some mechanism had been triggered. The vibration quickly spread throughout the oil storage room, and it seemed as if the entire hall was resounding with a violent grinding sound. Then, the ground in the center of the hall cracked, forming a square doorway. A huge stone staircase slowly rose from below, revealing a dark interior that seemed to lead to a dark passage deep underground. Chapter 431 Watcher. The Eye of Illusion used his magic to illuminate two illuminating magic stones. He gently tossed them down the passageway that had suddenly opened in the hallway's floor. The crystal white magic stones tumbled downward, quickly reaching the bottom of the passageway. It's just a basement nestled between the oil storage rooms. I thought the mechanism was already deep beneath the sea. The Eye of Illusion awkwardly drew his magic revolver from his waist. He had just requested it from a Northern Army logistics officer today, and had previously disdained to carry it with him. With the muzzle of his gun slightly pointed downward, he led the way down the stone steps into the underground passageway, followed closely by Duncan and the astrologer. The underground chamber contained nothing dangerous or unusual, not even the defensive mechanisms had been triggered. After all, after so many years, coupled with the impact of the landslide, any magical mechanisms would have long since broken down and become ineffective. As everyone lit up their magic stones, the already limited underground chamber was immediately illuminated. Forced-out stone pillars stood in the center, too thick for a single person to embrace. The low ceiling was still studded with the magical gems Harvey had discovered, each appearing dimmed and drained of their magical power. With Harvey's permission, the astrologer carefully pried off a piece, examining it in his hands. He then tentatively injected a tiny amount of magic power into it. The magic stone reacted instantly, emitting a faint orange-yellow glow, which then faded in an instant. It's indeed a magic stone of an undiscovered nature. Harvey nodded slightly, speculating, I think they're embedded here to power some magical device. After all, the protective array in the ground hall wouldn't require so many magic stones. As Dallin pondered for a moment, then shook his head in bewilderment. My lord, I'm sorry. I've never heard of the rumors of a secret chamber beneath the city's oil storage room. After all, there are so many secrets within the family, and only the most senior members of the family would likely know the full truth. A hybrid like Dallin, whose bloodline couldn't even be guaranteed to be pure, wouldn't even be worthy of living in the city of eternal night. But judging by the modified protective array in the ground hall, Harvey could at least determine that the magical device hidden underground wasn't an attack or trap. After all, even if there were any hidden treasures, it couldn't be hidden beneath the fuel storage room outside the castle. With this in mind, Harvey nodded to the Eye of Illusion and the astrologer, signaling them to try injecting magic power into the magic stone on the ceiling and activate the hidden magical device. As magic continued to flow in, the orange-yellow glow of the magic stone embedded in the ceiling grew increasingly intense. Accompanied by the crackling sound of stone and metal clashing, everyone watched in astonishment as four thick stone pillars in the center of the room suddenly and slowly sank. The area enclosed by them, the ground cracked and rose. A strangely shaped object appeared before them. A thick brass tube thrust straight into the ground, its upward end connected horizontally to a capstan resembling a steering wheel. The tail gradually tapered, and the end was sealed with a piece of transparent crystal. The Eye of Illusion reached Harvey's side before him and knocked on the tube. "This thing is hollow." Harvey frowned, feeling vaguely familiar with the device. It didn't seem like an alchemical device powered by magic. He instinctively leaned over to the upward curving end of the tube and peered through the crystal septum. It was pitch black, and nothing could be seen clearly. "Wait?" Harvey jerked his head up. He seemed to understand what this thing was. A telescope. Or perhaps, a periscope would be a better word. To verify his bold hypothesis, Harvey leaned back over the pipe mouth, raised his hand to the capstan that resembled a steering wheel, and with a slight force, it began to creak. Still, there was endless darkness, when suddenly, a flash of fluorescent green caught Harvey's eye. As expected, this periscope could be connected directly to the sea through a copper pipe deep underground, allowing observation of the seabed without diving. But why was such a non-magical device hidden so mysteriously beneath the oil storage room? It could be displayed openly for use. It contained no secrets of magical knowledge. It was simply the creation of a skilled craftsman. Harvey stood up and let Asterlin try it out. He asked, "Was this thing used to help whaling teams track whales?" Asterlin shook his head. "The ice whale roams near every swell. There's no need to chase it. It's big, clumsy, and slow to react. Hunting it doesn't require any tracking skills. It can see the seabed, but if it's not for a fishing, then what's the use?" The Eye of Illusion couldn't help but laugh. Could it be that the legendary mermaids live beneath the ice? Nonsense. The astrologer couldn't help but roll his eyes at him. Harvey suddenly felt a cold sweat break out on his back. They had always imagined that the alien enemies in the center of the continent would cross the vast natural buffer zone of permafrost and wasteland and launch an extermination invasion against the southern tribes living in the corner of the continent. The biggest question, of course, was why they had never done so before. After all, apart from the nearly 10,000 miles of distance, there was no insurmountable natural barrier preventing them from reaching it. Unless the enemy came from the seabed. Duncan in the Eye of Illusion described the hooded creatures as invulnerable to weapons and magic. Their strange shells couldn't be torn apart, even if their necks were broken. The more Harvey imagined it, the more it sounded like a diving suit, made of a tougher material with certain magical properties. Then there was the rusty metal cylinder on his back, gushing out terrifying black water that could be manipulated and condensed into any weapon. Well, now that he had a diving suit, it wouldn't be out of place to use it as an oxygen tank. The more Harvey thought about it, the more it seemed to become puzzling. It seemed as if all the enemy's appearances and the clues they had gathered all pointed to one ultimate answer: those hooded creatures came from the sea. And the so-called center of the continent was most likely always buried in the vast icy sea, or perhaps it had sunk to the bottom of the ocean due to some accident. Only this could explain why powerful tribes, who had never set foot in the southern continental corner, now wanted to invade en masse. Having lost their homeland, upon which they had thrived, they desperately needed to plunder and occupy new lands and resources to compensate for the losses and depletion of their tribe. And having built cities on the frozen sea, and anxiously guarding the kingdom of eternal night for centuries, their gaze was never fixed on the north, but rather, always fixed on the boundless, vast, and bottomless icy ocean beneath the ice. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 432: The Prototype of the Navy. After 2 days at the IC exploration base, Harvey hurriedly recalled his spirit puppet to Spark City. The injured members of the exploration team also returned to base camp with him, while the remaining spellcasters remained at the base, gradually advancing deeper into the submerged Eternal Night ruins, searching for any clues lost in time to the alien hostility emanating from the sea. For the safety and defense of the base, Harvey ordered the 2 100-man battalions of the Northern Army to remain stationed there to closely monitor the area surrounding the ruins. They also coordinated with the base's engineering team, over 100 strong, to complete the construction of the exploration base. As the lord of the city, he naturally had his work cut out for him. A week later, in the castle hall, officially designated the city lord's mansion, Harvey met with a crew and sailors he had directly ordered to urgently recruit throughout the territory. Reiner had given him a thorough briefing on the recruitment process yesterday, and Harvey hadn't expected to find so many seafaring talents so far from the coast, around Spark City in the central continent. After all, his orders required applicants to have experience sailing a boat, either solo or in a group, and to be literate, or at least pass a literacy exam. Only after flipping through the recruitment information report and personally meeting this group of high-end talents could Harvey suppress a wry smile and rub his forehead. They all did have boating experience, but most of it was limited to fishing on rafts or small fishing boats on the Ralph and Glacier rivers. Some also made a living as ferrymen. In a sense, they hadn't lied on their resumes. These people truly possessed the skills and experience to sail. In reality, there were fewer than 6 people who met Harvey's expectations, those with at least some experience sailing a multi-masted sailing vessel on an inland river. Most of them were refugees from the southern border, one of whom had previously served as a first mate and helmsman in a merchant fleet, having lived on the Ralph River for over a decade. After a moment's deliberation, Harvey decided to recruit 30 or so applicants. His self-built ironclad sailboats were vastly different from ordinary sailboats. They were much simpler and more convenient to operate, eliminating the need for experienced captains and skilled helmsmen. Training and qualification were quick and easy. These self-powered vessels required no wind power, and as long as they maintained a sufficient supply of magical fuel, no complex piloting skills were required, only normal vision and the ability to turn the steering wheel and capstan were sufficient. Furthermore, he had no intention of training these individuals like the shipping company's civilian crews. Harvey put down the personnel list and raised his hand to call over the waiting commander, Pierce. Then, turning to the applicants, he said, "I've reviewed your resumes. I summoned you today to personally inform you that everyone present has passed the recruitment assessment and will officially join the military, becoming honored naval cadets." He waved his hand. "No need to keep bowing. Stand up straight and meet this man beside me, your future commander-in-chief." "Yes, Lord Mayor." Everyone stood up cautiously, subconsciously glancing at those around them, their faces filled with bewilderment. Weren't they here to apply for crew and helmsman positions? How could they have been enlisted in the military and become naval cadets for no apparent reason? Good heavens! Spark City is 1,000 miles away, and it probably doesn't even reach the sea. However, a position like this, requiring the city lord to personally issue a recruitment order and then condescend to meet with someone, must be extremely important and promising. Judging by the city lord's regard for and protection of his subjects, he certainly wouldn't resort to pranks or defraud them. The Navy is the Navy, after all. He was promoted directly to officer upon enlistment, even though he's only a trainee at the moment. Harvey looked at the bewildered faces of the crowd and took the initiative to explain. Being an apprentice means that you haven't received a formal enlistment contract, and you may be eliminated before you pass the assessment. Of course, your salary will be only half of that of a regular soldier, and the rest of the benefits will be the same. During the 3-month apprenticeship, you will be responsible for learning a series of knowledge about the performance structure, driving skills, and energy operation of sailless ironclad ships. He paused and continued, "After the 3-month apprenticeship, I will personally assess your abilities. Only those who pass the assessment will be directly promoted to the official Navy, that is, the position of captain with the rank of mid-level officer. At that time, your salary will be 30% higher than that of officers of the same rank in the Army, but the military tasks you need to undertake will also be more rigorous and dangerous. Those who are unwilling to accept can quit now." A whisper sounded in the crowd, but no one stood up to give up. Those who dared to recommend themselves to the city lord without asking the reason were the old citizens who had joined Harvey's army the earliest. This group of people were naturally loyal to the pioneering territory and had the highest loyalty and trust in Harvey. After a moment, a middle-aged man, looking about 40, with a hint of gray in his hair, suddenly spoke up. "Respected City Lord," he asked, "after becoming naval midshipman, which military officer will instruct and train us? Are the ships we need to be familiar with and master, the types of civilian ironclad vessels used by shipping companies?" Harvey glanced at him in surprise. This man must be the veteran helmsman who had served as first mate in the merchant navy. His name seemed to be Gooders. He had just looked through his records and discovered that his eldest son also served in the military, but as a junior officer in the defense forces. Both father and son were eager to enlist and serve the Lord City Lord, and Harvey was truly touched by their unconditional trust and support. He smiled and said gently, "The instructor is me." These words immediately caused a stir among the crowd. Many looked up and glanced at Harvey, their eyes revealing a hint of obvious excitement and enthusiasm. Gooders shuddered, surprised. "Lord, you're going to teach us yourself?" Harvey smiled and shook his head, then suddenly turned to the crowd. "Is anyone among you familiar with or knowledgeable about the magic power machine?" Hands sparsely rose from the crowd. Lord, someone in my family works at the military factory. They say the magic power machine can't run continuously for long periods of time and needs regular water cooling. The liquid magic energy that powers the magic power machine is extremely precious. When there's no production or manufacturing work, the equipment can't be left idling. We must learn to conserve energy, and sustainable development. Wow, these were slogans from the employee handbooks of every important production department, and these veterans had memorized them by heart. Training this group personally was a necessary evil, but aside from him, no one in Spark City had any idea of the modern Navy model. And Harvey himself was barely a savvy keyboard military enthusiast, more of a trial and error tactic than to develop a suitable theoretical framework through practical application. The saying 10 years for an army, 100 years for a navy he'd heard in his previous life wasn't an exaggeration. Harvey could only hope that, with the blessing of magical technology, just as he had assembled a valiant and powerful Northern army in 10 months, he could now, in the same amount of time, raise a Northern navy expertly equipped with magical engines and ironclad ships. After all, not only him, but the entire management of Spark City would soon know that a boundless sea truly existed above the northern wasteland, and within that sea, there were likely alien enemies who would be a thorn in their side, threatening them with covetous intent. Chapter 433 Submarine Design. Chris and Benoit crouched low, their eyes almost pressed against the wide desk, staring intently at the blueprint Harvey had spread out, their expressions agonizing. "My lord, this is your new military ship design." Benoit straightened up and cleared his throat with a reserved air. "With all due respect, this doesn't conform to conventional ship design at all. Pointed at the front, rounded at the back, and thick in the middle, the whole thing resembled a large spindle with a corner cut off. Crucially, it appeared to be completely enclosed, the two couldn't see a deck anywhere. The new ship was approximately 12 meters long, yet its midsection expanded to nearly 6 meters wide. Compared to the ironclad vessels that sailed the Ralph River, it appeared even more massive and unwieldy, not unlike a slightly elongated tortoise shell. Most strikingly, the hull structure drawings depicted the new vessel broken down into several modules, each equipped with ports and docking slots, as if they could be assembled like building blocks. Chris, a longtime servant of Harvey's, was accustomed to frequent wild ideas and creative concepts. He saw many clues in the blueprints. A fully enclosed deck would effectively defend against enemy attacks, but it would also obstruct vision. Furthermore, if the ship were constructed entirely of metal, not only would its draft be excessive, but its load capacity and speed would also be significant issues. Harvey remained unperturbed by his subordinates pointing out of the direct design flaws and functional issues. He smiled and said, "These issues can be addressed. This is indeed the new warship that will soon enter trial production. As for the reason for its fully enclosed design," Harvey lightly traced the blueprints with his finger and said gravely, "I hope it can not only operate normally on the surface, but also dive and engage in underwater combat. That's why I am going to name it a submarine." "Submarine? Underwater combat?" Chris and Benoit exchanged a stunned glance, speechless. The chief alchemist immediately recalled a recent emergency high-level meeting. Swallowing hard, he whispered, You designed this new type of ship specifically to counter the alien enemies that might emerge from the frozen sea." Harvey nodded, refusing to elaborate. Submarines and shallow water gunboats like ironclads share similar design flaws. When equipped with a single magical engine, speed and maneuverability become their most significant drawbacks. Even empty, carrying only the necessary fuel and crew, their average speed dipped below 10 kilometers per hour. Later modifications, including 2 magical cannons, crews, and ammunition reserves, reduced their speed to under 6 kilometers per hour, making them a veritable tortoise on the Ralph River. The main reason for this is that ironclads are inherently heavy. While they can be used to transport people and cargo, their ability to break ice makes speed less of a concern. However, as warships, they are naturally cumbersome and unsuitable. Besides, right now, He wasn't afraid of the aristocratic regimes and the church's Inquisition forces south of the Divine Spine Mountains. What truly irritated him was the alien invaders, seemingly thousands of miles away, but practically indistinguishable from their immediate surroundings. Those skinned freaks, whose origins he had yet to fully grasp. Whose technological trajectory he hadn't fully grasped. Luckily, they were all carbon-based creatures, and a broken neck or a bullet through the body would kill them instantly. This gave Harvey confidence and a basis for support. Since all his fears stemmed from insufficient firepower, he could simply focus on increasing his firepower and weapon range. After discussing the submarine designs, Harvey and the two chief alchemists had a quick lunch and then hurried to the shipbuilding workshops by the glacial river. The Ministry of Construction was constructing and expanding a more comprehensive deepwater warship dock adjacent to the civilian dock. Thanks to the glacial river's origins in the towering Divine Spine Mountains, its powerful currents and sharp ice flows have carved a wide and deep channel. The middle section of the river alone is nearly 100 meters deep, perfectly meeting the standards and requirements for submarine development and testing. Sir, how do we transport the submarine built in Spark City to the Ice Sea base? Benoit was at a loss for ideas. Even if we follow the glacial river with its countless tributaries, I'm afraid we won't be able to reach the frozen tundra. Furthermore, even with the most powerful planetary teleportation array, it would be impossible to transport a 100-ton armored submarine, let alone tow it into the water solely by human power. Harvey chuckled and slowly explained, so I designed it with a modular structure. Simply put, all its components are built in Spark City, then transported via teleportation array to the Ice Sea base for on-site assembly and launch. This modular design also takes into account the submarine's waterproof and airtightness. Simply assembling and welding alone couldn't guarantee complete watertightness, so thin steel plates coated with rubberized paint were welded into individual hollow boxes. These boxes were then assembled and spliced together to form the submarine's main structure. This block-like shipbuilding method, without considering draft and keel balance, was completely unrelated to traditional shipbuilding techniques. Harvey simply needed to ensure the submarine could ascend and descend normally, and that the naval personnel responsible for piloting the ship could use the onboard magic cannon to attack if it encountered an enemy underwater. As for the powertrain, Harvey decided to retain the propeller technology of the ironclad ship, upgrading the power unit to accommodate 3 magic engines. Diving and surfacing would be entirely controlled by mechanical gears, utilizing the submarine's split hollow tanks to achieve both water-filled submersion and water-discharged surfacing. This naturally required the support of the alchemy laboratory team, led by Chris and Benoit. To complete the arduous task of perfecting the design and building the first experimental vessel, Harvey generously granted the laboratory supreme authority to freely allocate vital strategic materials, requiring unconditional cooperation from all municipal production departments. The two alchemy chiefs, clutching the blueprints, confidently left the city lord's mansion as Harvey watched them off. Harvey finally found a moment of free time and returned to his study to begin work on the so-called naval training materials. With his half-baked skills as a keyboard military enthusiast, completing a comprehensive set of military theory materials that combined common sense and professional expertise was nearly impossible. While some routine military training adhered to Army standards, it was fine. However, it involved training on military ship operation, surface and underwater combat, the use and maintenance of shipborne weaponry, technical training for various shipboard positions, and even the hydrological and meteorological characteristics of the combat zone. Harvey felt a splitting headache as he stared at the spread-out white paper. He summoned the guards guarding the door. "Go, get Commander-in-Chief Pierce to see me." Chapter 434 Military General Staff Headquarters. Pierce, summoned by the city lord midway through the mobilization meeting, hurried to the city lord's mansion. "My lord, I'm here," Harvey hummed, raising his chin and motioning his old subordinate to take a seat. "I heard that group of military activists you've recruited at the public academy are about to graduate." Pierce paused, then remembered that Harvey had long ago instructed him to dispatch junior officers from the Northern Army to the public academies in the territory to share their glorious combat stories with the students, hoping to inspire the new generation of young people to join the army and build a sense of belonging and honor to their homeland. Those stories of heroic battles were indeed extremely popular among the young students. Pierce often heard at the military headquarters daily meetings that officers going to give speeches were blocked by students, who demanded to graduate early and join the army. "Sir, while these students' backgrounds may be fine, most of them are barely grown-ups. even if we grant them special admission into the military. I'm worried that their boasted education won't allow them to endure the hardships of starting from the ground up. Furthermore, the military's relentlessly rigorous training program for new recruits is highly unlikely to endure. The 50% dropout rate during the 3-month probation period, despite the Northern Army's massive expansion, speaks volumes. Everyone dreams of the high salaries and benefits of a professional soldier, hoping to wield powerful magical weapons to crush all enemies, ultimately ascending to the throne to receive the city lord's personal commendation and the acclaim of the people. However, reality presents a harsh blow to these qualified young men. To obtain these extraordinary privileges comes at a cost and invaluable effort. Harvey didn't rush to refute Pierce's opinion. Instead, he smiled gently. Do you remember how long ago? Police Chief Uriel briefly joined the Northern Army and I made an exception to appoint him as its political advisor. Your Excellency, why did you call me here today just to bring up old things? Pierce was puzzled, but he still honestly recalled. I remember that you asked Superintendent Uriel to teach the soldiers the way of chivalry. This was something Pierce couldn't understand. The first batch of veterans of the Northern Army he trained were all brave and skilled in battle, absolutely loyal to their lord, and disciplined and upright. Compared to those nobles who professed loyalty and honor but were actually obsessed with self-interest and power, they were probably more like true knights. Harvey, naturally, saw through Pierce's grumbling and shook his head with a wry smile. I want to use these highly educated student soldiers as a foundation, and then select some suitable candidates from the middle and lower level officers with rich combat command experience in the Northern Army to form a general staff. Staff? Pierce was puzzled. My lord, don't you already have 2 chief advisors, Mr. Asdalen and Mr. Duncan, who are highly knowledgeable and intelligent? What use can those students be? Those rude lower-level officers under me, most of them can barely pass the literacy test. Harvey laughed and said, I didn't ask them to be advisors to me, I asked them to be advisors to you. Pierce stood up from the sofa and knelt on one knee with a pale face. My lord, are you dissatisfied with me? Please allow me. What are you thinking about? Harvey covered his face and said, the establishment of a staff department in the army is to assist your command and management work, not because we are dissatisfied with you and want to replace you with someone. He got up helplessly, pulled his old subordinate up, and pressed him back to the sofa. The entire Xinghuo City Territorial Army has barely surpassed 10,000 men, right? Yes, including the 3,000 plus recruits still in training, it's indeed close to 10,000. Pierce was incredibly knowledgeable about military size and manpower statistics, and could give Harvey a precise figure even with his eyes closed. During the recent operation against Fingigan City, you, as the overall commander, still had to personally lead the charge. Without you, our headquarters, I'm uneasy about handing over the additional military duties to others. Pierce, the Army's commander-in-chief, had to be on the front lines for most operations, a genuine overkill. Harvey patted him on the shoulder and asked bluntly, besides you, who else in the Northern Territory Army is capable of commanding? Pierce finally understood Harvey's true intentions and breathed a sigh of relief, his expression still grim. Besides me. Vaughn is too cautious, blindly loyal, and inflexible. Harvey nodded in agreement. Not bad. Pierce paused. Wayne, too radical, and always adventurous. This was evident from how, even as a civilian officer, he dared to declare his intention to overrule Harvey's orders and assassinate Duke Ralph directly in front of 2 high-level spellcasters. The army must not be left in the hands of an adventurous commander. The remaining veteran officers of the Northern Army, such as Duff and Tommy, each had their own distinct shortcomings. They were either pure fools or clever but short-sighted. If these men were separated from Harvey and Pierce and asked to independently shoulder a designated important combat mission, most would likely give Harvey a hopeless answer, a battle plan, a steady advance. This is when the importance of an independent staff unit within the military becomes apparent. With their higher education and experience as political advisors at the grassroots level, the student soldiers naturally shed their theoretical limitations and became qualified staff officers. Furthermore, with the guidance of veteran co's from the Northern Frontier Army, they worked together to provide decision-making advice and reference for the main combat officers in the formulation and coordination of combat missions. This was undoubtedly more effective than the arbitrary decisions of the commander-in-chief or the impulsive orders of Harvey, the city lord, from his distant headquarters. Harvey also intended to replicate his previous life's understanding of the division of responsibilities within the general staff, establishing a combat command department, a recruiting and mobilization department, and a logistics coordination and management department. Within these three clearly defined departments, there would be several sub-departments, including operations, intelligence, training, recruitment, armaments, and logistics. This would be a near-perfect solution to the current shortage of military command talent. Harvey's exposition on the importance of the general staff left Pierce stunned and speechless for a long time. When he finally stopped to drink some water, he heard Pierce swallow hard and say dryly, "Sir, according to the size of the general staff you envision, the number of reserve student soldiers we have developed in school is simply not enough." Chapter 435 Magical Steel. The Ministry of Industry has 20 blast furnaces, and the steel they produce doesn't even meet your testing standards, Harvey asked, looking up from his desk in disbelief. When he handed the submarine designs to Chris and Benoit, he had granted them special permission to freely access vital strategic materials and demanded unconditional cooperation from all production and manufacturing departments in the development and testing of the new vessel. But they never expected that the initial development would be bogged down by the crucial material issue. Back when it was still a frontier territory, the traditional cast iron kilns, churning out pig iron day and night, alone were sufficient to meet the territory's daily needs. With the advent of blast furnaces, steel production reached unprecedented heights. The territory's steel production was divided into two main categories, military and civilian. The former supplied arsenals, shipyards, and the railway transportation sector, while the latter primarily served the Ministry of Construction's plumbing, lighting, and bicycle factories, as well as the manufacture of civilian agricultural and industrial tools. The busiest manufacturing department in all of Spark City right now is the Steel Smelting Center, occupying the majority of the city's suburban industrial park. Production is practically non-stop, with even the workers working 3 shifts. Their salaries are among the best in the entire industrial park. Chris and Benoit exchanged a glance, each grimacing. "Sir, this is a key requirement from your design drawings. The steel used to manufacture the submarine's hull modules, after die casting, must be able to withstand a pressure of 100 kilograms without noticeable deformation or cracking," Harvey sighed, holding his forehead awkwardly. According to the physics he'd learned in school in his previous life, seawater, due to its density, increases in pressure by 1 atmosphere for every 10 meters it descends. At a depth of 100 meters, the pressure is nearly 10 atmospheres. This pressure, applied to the entire surface area of the submarine, simply means it needs to withstand a force of nearly 100 kilograms. However, most military submarines, as products of modern technology, have a maximum diving depth of only around 300 meters. Therefore, Harvey envisioned that his handmade iron turtle submersible, capable of diving within 100 meters, would be considered quite impressive. After all, the primary battlefield would undoubtedly be on land, with underwater operations serving at most as early warning and surprise attacks. Steel making itself is a highly complex production process. Whether it's modern or traditional steel making, steel production remains a crucial metric for measuring a country or region's industrialization. Harvey only knew that the world's current smelting technology was severely outdated. Blast furnace steel making alone could easily leapfrog the competition, but in reality, compared to later generations, it would be no better than the private smelting workshops of some mining companies. The vast quantities of pig iron ingots produced within his territory were inherently of varying quality. The skilled blacksmiths responsible for identifying these ingots could only perform a simple sorting process. The high-quality ingots were sent to military factories to be crafted into magical weapons and alchemical beasts, while the lower-quality ingots were further smelted into steel and blast furnaces. A portion was quickly divvied up by the various eager civilian production departments, forged on assembly lines into various civilian tools for distribution throughout the territory. Producing high-quality and controllable steel now seemed to be Harvey's primary priority. If our own steel doesn't meet the requirements, then we can try adding some magical minerals. Radiant copper, frigid black iron, mithril, molten gold? Anything you think would be suitable? Experiment with it. Cost was not a concern for the time being, as long as the submarine's test model was successfully completed. Harvey believed that a material issue could be addressed quickly. When it came to the application of magic, no one was better at seamlessly integrating the two than he was. Harvey, freed from the tedious affairs of reality, logged onto the Spellcaster forum for the first time in a long time and found the Union chief, who had been confined to a corner, surfing the forums for a long time. Scorching overlord, flesh disintegration? Isn't this the flesh magic that undead spellcasters specialize in? Why are you suddenly interested in it and want to ask me for advice, Kilthuzid? As you know, flesh disintegration targets living beings. What I really want to inquire about is the brand new model of this spell that His Excellency the Shadow Knight has reportedly recast and improved upon, Shadow Disintegration. This spell was once recorded in the magic library of the Alea Sky Realm. Although it had never been officially published, it was successfully included in the Spellcaster Forum's Magic Encyclopedia. After Harvey stumbled upon it through a search, he has been focusing on it and studying it. This improved spell, which Chief Gallagher self-deprecatingly called a useless 9 rings in his paper, was a life-saving shot in Harvey's eyes. Its effects were completely different from flesh disintegration, featuring a powerful separation ability specifically targeting inorganic matter. It could easily remove impurities from smelted metals, allowing precise control of elemental ratios during the smelting phase, ensuring consistent output while also improving the quality of the finished product. This 9 rings spell, once considered useless by the legendary battle mage, was enough to instantly elevate the steel-making capabilities of Spark City by several notches. Harvey now faced only one challenge. Chief Shadow Knight Gallagher was currently leading the assault on the demonic front central hub in the Evil Moon Mountains, having been disconnected from the internet for months. Harvey had no choice but to contact the quarantine Lord of Blazing Fire, asking him to mediate so he could obtain the model and structural analysis for this useless 9 rings spell. Lord of Blazing Fire, Shadow Disintegration? That was Gallagher's accidental burst of research inspiration, but it ultimately proved that a battle mage with a background in academic research lacked any talent. Haha, this thing isn't worth exchanging for anything. I can always give it to you. The chief, who always strictly adhered to the forum's principle of equal exchange, suddenly acted so generously and casually that Harvey immediately became alert. Kilthuzid, this may be somewhat unconventional. While you are not short of money or rare magical materials, please make a request based on the value of the disintegration. I can also include some magic ammunition for the Lance of Oblivion. What do you think? The crystal screen of the magical brain device remained silent for a long time. Just when Harvey thought the other party was going to refuse with silence, the code name of the Scorching Overlord relit, and a line of text slowly appeared before his eyes. Scorching Lord, Mr. Kilthuzid, the Federation has relied heavily on the Spellcaster Forum and your dedicated assistance in dealing with the demonic war, and the conflict with the Church. But please don't overthink it. We haven't planted any intelligence agents in your territory, nor do we intend to spy on the situation there. The Scorching Lord seemed to be holding back, unleashing a long, heartfelt message. Scorching Lord, we have heard that you have established a city in the northern wastes where spellcasters and mortals work closely together and coexist on equal terms, and that you have recently expanded somewhat. So, I have a proposal. I wonder if you would consider allowing the Federation to establish a small northern branch in your new city. Chapter 436 Factional Struggle. The Spellcasters Union is an ally of our Spark City. If the City Lord allows them to establish a branch in the north, I believe we should inform them of the alien enemy intelligence in the center of the continent as soon as possible. Reiner's tone was cold and rigid, and his voice was strangely filled with a sound of metallic friction. After all, they are very likely to be the first allies we can win over in the future. Those mage regiments entrenched in the Evil Moon Mountains are a more powerful ally to defend against the enemy. The 4 words more powerful immediately pricked Pierce's nerves. He raised an eyebrow and rarely sang a different tune from his old colleague. Strong ally? The fact that they can achieve today's counterattack north of the Evil Moon Mountains is due to the situation created by our support of anti-magic weapons. Mr. General Manager, do you really think that those flashy battle mages can compare to the loyal elite soldiers under the Lord's command? The 2 city lords' direct subordinates suddenly engaged in a heated argument, creating a momentary awkwardness in the conference hall. Fortunately, Chief Advisor Asdalin intervened to mediate. Our capabilities are undoubtedly superior to those of the traditional, conservative mage chapters, but they are not entirely without advantages, at least in terms of flexibility and mobility. Those scout mages, who have spent years on the line between life and death and experienced in combat with demons, are, in a sense, on par with the finest special operations soldiers. Even Harvey's own bloodline warriors wouldn't dare claim victory. In terms of flexibility and mobility, equipped with military off-road magic vehicles, we're not inferior to those battle mages, are we? Vaughn, commander of the Northern Army's 1st Battalion and also leader of a special operations team, spoke up, trying to justify his reputation. Hearing this, Chris couldn't help but interject, "There are always terrains in areas that can't be traversed by magic vehicles, and you can't fly like them. I'm just giving an example. Besides, not everyone in the Federation's Mage Regiment is high-ranking, but as for magic vehicles, every member of our Special Forces squad has a fully equipped one." Chris was speechless, shutting his mouth and looking up at the sky. Harvey, having recovered from his thoughts of refining steel with shadow disintegration, noticed a tense atmosphere in the meeting room. He quickly clapped his hands and said, "Let's adjourn for now. We've been arguing all morning. Let's eat something here and then continue." Following his instructions, attendants began to arrive from outside the conference hall, pushing food carts, bringing freshly baked snacks, fruits, and tea to the tables. Some people filled their stomachs, while others went to the balcony to smoke cigarettes. The tense atmosphere suddenly eased. Ever since Harvey revealed to the officials the Federation's request to establish a branch in Spark City, a subtle sense of unrest has been creeping into the atmosphere of recent work meetings. Harvey could clearly see that his officials were already forming factions. The administration, led by Reiner, was moderate and conservative. They adhered to Harvey's philosophy of attracting talent, believing that any organization they could use, as long as it wasn't a hostile force, should be maintained in a friendly alliance. Through close cooperation and exchange, they subtly employed sugar-coated bullets to slowly but surely assimilate others into their own camp. Advanced magical technology, advanced alchemical artifacts, a comfortable and convenient living environment, generous salaries and benefits, all of Spark City's unique features served as leverage to attract talent and labor. Compared to the Northern Army's deadly weapons, the administration's sugar-coated bullets were truly powerful weapons that most people were completely defenseless against. This gentle and tolerant approach naturally appealed to alchemists like Chris, who were members of the Alchemy Quest Society and had deep ties to the Union. Therefore, whenever the executive office implemented a policy, the Alchemy Lab was always the first to side with them. Meanwhile, the Northern Army, represented by Pierce, along with the Defense Forces and the Police Department, were radically xenophobic. The Army, a tightly knit armed organization, and its officers, often hailing from the wastelands, refugees from the South, or pariahs, naturally rejected the traditionally arrogant establishment, whether ordinary Southern nobles or arrogant Union spellcasters. The necromancers, who had always faced discrimination from the orthodox spellcasters, naturally sided with the army, a fact that surprised Harvey greatly. The fact that spellcasters in Spark City were actually aligning with immortal soldiers was truly bizarre. This was entirely understandable. After all, the Magic Academy, where the necromancers reside, currently dominated the teaching at the territory's Spellcaster Academy. Naturally, these discriminated against groups didn't want the Union to gain a foothold in Spark City and squeeze out their faction's interests and voice. Unfortunately, the radical faction, led by the military, had been dealing with others with guns for a long time, but their understanding of personnel relations and current affairs was far inferior to that of the executive office. The only mediators, as Darren and Duncan, were heedless of the city lord's lead and mostly sat on the sidelines. During heated debates at the meetings, the radicals were often defeated by the conservatives, leaving them frustrated. Had Harvey not spoken out, today's situation would likely have been similar to the previous one, another one-sided debate. Factional conflict within a large political organization was commonplace. Harvey had witnessed it numerous times, even back when he founded the Spellcaster Forum. Even virtual internet forums saw conflicting positions and ideologies leading to group-based exclusion, let alone real-life ones. This was a simple tactic used by those in power to check their subordinates' monopolistic power, simply by not allowing excessive indulgence or favoring one side. However, things were different now. The news that the exploration team had encountered mass aliens during their northern expansion had left Harvey feeling a sense of unease, a sense of being attacked from both sides, yet he didn't know the enemy's true nature. To the south, the secular nobility and the church were unsure when they would withdraw, and they would once again begin to cause trouble for him, the Mage Lord who controlled a large swath of St. Valen's territory. In these difficult times, Harvey felt it was only natural to allow the warmongering faction to gain the upper hand, as it would be more advantageous. After a brief recess, Harvey, returning to his seat, took a sip from his teacup, cleared his throat, and spoke solemnly, regarding whether to accept the establishment of a branch of the Federation in Spark City. The opening remarks marked the main point of the day's debate. All officials present immediately sat at attention, their heads tilted to the side, their gazes fixed intently on the territory's supreme ruler. I believe the Federation's traditional branch operation model is too outdated and not conducive to developing a close cooperative relationship with us. I plan to establish a new Federation, in Spark City, abandoning the past practice of only accepting orthodox spellcasters. Alchemical beings, bloodline warriors, alchemists, marginalized spellcasting factions, and even alien races that maintain friendly relations with us should all be included and treated equally. Chapter 437, Defending Against Foreign Aggression and Maintaining Domestic Stability. Union Chief Sereth was trapped beneath the Alea Magicite mines. The three chiefs gathered for a rare meeting to discuss important matters. Even the long-absent Grand Commander of the Mage chapter, Gallagher, appeared solemnly in the silver full-length mirror. The offensive against the demonic front central hub is at a critical juncture. Why are we discussing the Union's presence in the north with Kil'Thuzad now? Gallagher frowned, his displeasure evident. We can't do without his assistance right now. If our ammunition supply is cut off, the progress we've spent over half a year building will be lost. The short Dawson, a rare ally, spoke with concern. True. To offend him would be to offend the Forum. We don't need to rush into his sphere of influence. Sereth didn't rush to explain, instead sitting in a chair, teacup in hand, smiling silently. Gallagher always hated his seemingly leisurely demeanor and snorted impatiently, even if they agree, so what? That's the Mage territory where the Forum forces are entrenched. Who do you think is suitable to send? Won't you be fooled by Kil'Thuzad? What benefit will you get? As soon as he finished speaking, the first chief put the teacup in his hand on the table with a bang, staring at his two old friends with burning eyes. What if you send me there myself? Do you think it's appropriate? That's not appropriate, isn't it? Who to send? You go. Dawson was stunned for a moment, stood up suddenly and said in disbelief, Are you crazy? Has your soul separation syndrome relapsed again? It is unheard of to let the first chief of the Federation be stationed in a city branch founded by an independent spellcaster. In this way, a layer, which already has empty defenses, will actually have only Dawson, the legendary chief, in charge. If the papal state of Gowers were to learn of this, they would likely mobilize in full force to completely destroy this temple of truth and capital of magic, considered by spellcasters across the continent. Gallagher's lips twitched as he mumbled, I know you're trapped here with nothing to lose, but you shouldn't jeopardize your status and position. Besides, the Foreign can't possibly help you escape. Furthermore, Kil'Thuzad wouldn't agree to allow such a powerful figure as the Union chief to constantly monitor him within his own territory. It would be a complete self-destruction. He will agree to it, Sereth murmured softly. He then stood up and instantly changed the subject. That ancient historical rumor that's been circulating on the Forum lately, you've all heard of it, right? Dawson said glumly. It's been circulating privately for a long time, but no one has dared to verify it personally with the Forum administrators. A high-level spellcaster codenamed Wolfwalker, while adventuring deep into the northern wastes, stumbled upon an ancient wizard's ruin. The ancient texts he retrieved revealed a shocking historical secret. Deep within the frozen earth further north of the northern wastes lies a place of origin known as the center of the continent, the true cradle of the southern territory's tribes. This unverified and untraceable rumor had been circulating quietly for a long time in the Spellcaster Forum's private chatrooms. As public opinion grew, more and more forum members began to seek to verify the rumor. Many, in fact, even discovered a glimmer of support from lost or damaged ancient texts and relics across the southern territory. With a skeptical and inquisitive mindset, diligent exploration and discerning truth from falsehood are the fundamental principles of the spellcaster's pursuit of truth. As these historical facts, increasingly corroborating the rumors, gradually emerge, piecing together a true story closer to the truth, they excite the forum's senior members and spark endless discussion. Everyone understands the implications. Once the historical truth is revealed, the churches claim that the God of Light created all life, led by humanity, and transformed it into the divine Spine Mountains to prevent the invasion of demon-evolved alien races will be instantly shattered. The foundation of faith the church has cultivated for centuries will crumble in an instant. If the rumors are true, it will be a devastating blow to the church. Not only will the secular nobility immediately abandon them, but the common people will also gradually abandon this false faith, depriving them of their greatest foundation of power. Although Dawson has always been a conservative within the Union, he will show no mercy to the church, whom the spellcasters consider their sworn enemy. Gallagher pondered for a moment and wondered, what if the rumors cannot be confirmed? Who would dare to openly ask those mysterious beings for confirmation in the forum? Aren't you afraid that those gentlemen are from the so-called center of the continent? Salas interrupted Gallagher's rebuttal and said in a deep voice, the high-level mage codenamed Wolfwalker is Kil'Thuzad's spellcasting consultant. Don't ask me how I know their relationship. Except for this agent, I'm afraid there is no organization in the southern region that has the ability to send high-level spellcasters to go deep into the frozen wasteland to conduct exploration operations. The Federation can't do it, which means that no organization in the 7 Wizarding Kingdoms has this strength. As the most powerful spellcasting organization in the southern region, the Federation is still confident in this issue. Salas paused and continued, not only that, the ancient texts discovered in the ruins also mention that there are many alien races in the distant center of the continent, more powerful than us humans or demons, enemies that are eyeing us covetously and may invade from the south at any time. After he finished speaking, he took a deep breath, his expression seemed to contain a hint of unwillingness and anger. And now, we humans in the southern border, like the demons entrenched in the northern wastelands, were all expelled and exiled here from the center of the continent, the losers of the War of All Races. As soon as he finished speaking, Gallagher and Dawson gasped and said in unison, we are the expelled ones? There are even more powerful alien enemies in the place where the human race originated? Truth be told, Salas, is this absolutely true? Salas nodded and said in a muffled voice, asking for confirmation from Kil'Thuzad is equivalent to asking for confirmation from those mysterious beings on the forum. I think this is highly credible. Dawson slapped his thigh and suddenly realized, so that's it. You want to set up a branch on Kil'Thuzad's territory, just to place our own people in their exploration team and personally verify the authenticity of this rumor. On the one hand, it is true. On the other hand, I also want to convey a message to the other party. Salas stood up, looking at his 2 colleagues with burning eyes. If the rumors are true, our Federation will stand with the wasteland city created by Kil'Thuzad to jointly resist the alien enemies from the north. Whether it was during the Dragon War or the battle between humans and demons more than 100 years ago, spellcasters will always stand at the forefront of defending their tribe. Chapter 438 Cracking Furnace. After successfully obtaining the 9-ring model and analytical structure of shadow disintegration from the Union's chief, Harvey instructed the 2 chiefs of the alchemy lab to put aside their submarine development work and focus on building his envisioned magical steel-making furnace. Compared to the previous kills for smelting pig iron and blast furnaces for smelting steel, the new furnace completely abandoned traditional construction, its volume multiplied several times over. Constructed of clay-fired refractory bricks and reinforced concrete, it measured over 30 meters in length, 10 meters in width, and a height of less than 3 meters. From the outside, it resembled a rectangular pool covered with stone bricks. The smelting system is essentially the same as the previous steel-making blast furnace, still heated by coal and charcoal, with alchemical beasts stationed in the vents constantly blowing air into the furnace to increase the temperature and combustion efficiency. However, this time, Chris and Benoit took a different approach, ingeniously adding dragon flame powder, a highly effective alchemical artifact that aids combustion. Combined with the fire-enhancing array inscribed within the furnace, this allows the new steel-making furnace to achieve rapid heating and efficient smelting. If such a large steel-making furnace were smelted using conventional methods, simply removing impurities and slag would be a significant challenge. The resulting steel would also naturally be of inconsistent quality, with varying carbon contents requiring manual selection for specific uses. However, with a 9-ring array constructed using shadow disintegration, these previous concerns were eliminated. Simply add pig iron to the furnace for smelting, activate the array, and the entire batch of steel would be broken down at once, removing any unwanted and harmful impurities, allowing it to be remelted. The industrial park located in the eastern suburbs of Spark City still has ample vacant land. Harvey plans to construct a new batch of these cracking furnaces here, joining the existing cast iron kilns and steel-making blast furnaces to form a new steel-making cluster. Once the cracking furnaces are completed and put into mass production, they will not only bring a large number of stable jobs to Spark City, but will also increase the territory's steel production and quality by more than tenfold. This will provide Harvey with a more solid industrial foundation for his new round of production and development plans. Furthermore, Harvey has new ideas for developing new weapons for the magic arsenal. The original, primitive magic gun, used a direct charge method, capable of only 5 consecutive rounds before requiring recharge. Its significant operational and resupply limitations led to its swift and ruthless elimination. The subsequent magic gun, Type I, utilizes the revolutionary beetle bullet, allowing for a single loadout of 10 rounds, increasing damage efficiency several-fold and quickly becoming standard issue for the Northern Army. As the Army's battles evolved from defending frontier territories to defending against external enemies, numerous soldiers were frequently required to leave their base camp and conduct long-distance operations. Harvey, already equipped with an alchemy laboratory and the assistance of alchemists like Chris, took advantage of this opportunity to develop a magazine system for the magic gun. This replaced the traditional method of reloading bullets after each round with a magazine-style loading system, increasing the gun's ammunition capacity to 20 rounds. He subsequently improved the range and aiming components of the magic gun I, and this upgraded version, designated the Magic Gun II, went into mass production, ushering in a wave of upgrades in the Army's main battle weaponry. As the magic gun's performance and structure improved, Harvey shifted his focus to developing portable light weapons, resulting in the creation of the magic revolver. This was not only issued to the Army as a secondary weapon, but also adopted by the territory's police and defense forces. The subsequent development of the magic machine gun, magic-powered cannon, and magic naval gun went on to become a necessity. The military factory has always faced a persistent problem in the manufacture of all weapons, the high defect and scrap rates. The loading of magical ammunition is entirely handled by an alchemical beast-based filling line, with ordinary workers only responsible for casting the metal shells. The high efficiency and mature process present no major challenges. However, the manufacture of firearms is quite vexing. The core component of all magical weapons is nothing more than the enchanted metal barrels, which are pre-engraved with charging inscriptions by alchemical beasts. Weapon technicians then assemble the barrel, stock, magazine, and trigger sights. Finally, the quality inspection team conducts several test firings, and if there are no problems, the guns pass the production line. But the problem always arose in the first and most crucial step, the barrel casting process. The cutting machine built to Harvey's specifications in the alchemy lab led by Chris couldn't consistently produce quality enchanted barrels, whether operated manually or by alchemy beasts. While seemingly flawless at first glance, after assembly and test firing, the magical energy pathways became clogged, the magic stones failed to fire, and occasionally, the barrel exploded. Harvey and Chris knew the root of all these problems, the inconsistent quality of the steel used as the barrel's raw material. With the advent of the pyrolysis furnace, all the difficulties in weapon manufacturing were resolved. At least the magical machine gun, which had long been elusive, could finally be mass-produced. Furthermore, Harvey planned to mass-produce a simplified version of the magic Barrett sniper rifle, originally used to assassinate Archduke Ralph. Thus, in a large-scale direct engagement, the magic-powered artillery and naval guns would suppress enemies beyond 1,000 meters, while magic-powered sniper rifles would target key enemy units within 800 meters. Beyond the 500-meter range, machine guns and rifles would alternate their attacks. If a truly powerful supernatural enemy managed to penetrate within the 200-meter battle line, soldiers who had exhausted their rifles could draw their revolvers to cover their retreat. In theory, this would ensure complete coverage of every engagement point, leaving no gaps for the enemy to exploit. Harvey's anxiety, reflecting on the summer offensive that had to be postponed due to the exploration team's encounter with the alien advance party on the frozen land, instantly gave way to confidence. While the effectiveness of this configuration against unknown aliens remained to be determined, it was more than sufficient to deal with the church and nobles in the southern border. Harvey therefore decided to accelerate a strategic goal of resisting external threats while maintaining internal stability and quickly stabilize the situation around Spark City. He would no longer employ a gentle defensive counterattack, but instead joined forces with the Federation to directly attack Grand Duke St. Valen and the Church coalition from both sides. He aimed to completely eliminate the Church's entrenched presence in the central southern continent, even removing Grand Duke St. Valen from power if necessary and taking over himself. As long as he could quickly stabilize the situation in the south and absorb more territorial resources and a new labor force, Harvey didn't care about public opinion or reputation. He simply wanted to unite all the forces and ethnic groups in the south to resist the imminent war of genocide before the powerful alien enemy fully arrived. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 439 The Missing Grand Duke. In the Grand Duke's court in Golden City, the capital of St. Valen, the tall, white-haired Duke Ralph paced back and forth along the garden corridor, angrily addressing his pale-faced attendants. Where the hell has His Majesty been? I can't believe not even the Queen knows where he's gone. After being attacked by a transcendental assassin sent by Harvey, Duke Ralph was utterly terrified. Adhering to the noble principle of turning to the church immediately when encountering a hostile spellcaster, he immediately requested assistance from the Radiant Bishop in Fingigan City, but the reply he received was that the church's transcendental forces in St. Valen were currently occupied in the border region battling Darius and had no resources left to protect His Excellency. Archbishop Fingigan cautiously advised the Duke to conceal his whereabouts and secretly retreat to the capital, avoiding alerting his subjects and family to prevent any leaks along the way. The Duke, already a frightened bird, naturally obeyed. But who could have imagined that, no sooner had he secretly arrived in the capital than the gates of his hometown, Fingigan City, were shattered by artillery fire. After just one night of fighting, his elite Fingigan knights were nearly annihilated, and his entire family captured. That was the rich fiefdom that the Ralph family had managed for generations. If he surrendered it, Ralph's position as the founding duke would be lost. He desperately sought the aid of Grand Duke St. Valen, but upon arriving in the capital, he was informed that His Majesty had personally arrived at the front lines. When he dispatched his men to the front, they were shocked to find His Majesty nowhere to be seen. Grand Duke St. Valen had vanished in plain sight. Your Excellency, Your Majesty has been extremely close to the church in recent years. Before the war with Darius, he resided in a palace near the royal capital cathedral. Aside from church priests and personal attendants, he refused to see anyone else. In other words, if one wanted to see the Grand Duke, the only way to discover his whereabouts was to contact the church. This is absurd. Do vassals need permission from the church to see their king? Duke Ralph exclaimed in disbelief. The Prime Minister and the State Minister, accompanied by numerous officials, hurriedly arrived and crowded the corridors of the royal court's inner courtyard. Not only Duke Ralph, but these confidential ministers hadn't seen His Majesty in person for over a year. If it weren't for the frequent sightings of documents bearing His Majesty's bloodline seal being delivered from the royal court, it would be hard not to suspect that His Majesty had been secretly murdered. The dignitaries had spent the better part of a day in the royal court when a tall, thin, and elderly figure slowly emerged from the inner courtyard, Archbishop St. Valen. The Archbishop, whose hair and beard were all white but whose face looked like a middle-aged man, looked around at everyone and said in a deep voice, "Everyone, I have told you more than once that His Majesty the Grand Duke is not convenient to meet with his subjects at the moment. All government affairs must be discussed and handled by ministers and chief priests." Before the ministers could speak, Duke Ralph pushed through the crowd and stepped forward, saying with a gloomy face, "Why doesn't Your Majesty want to see me? If I hadn't obeyed his call, I would have sent most of the knights and troops of Fingigan City to the border to reinforce, so that the defense of the fiefdom would not be empty and it would almost be murdered by assassins." After he said that, he slapped the sword at his waist and said with gritted teeth, "If Your Majesty is unwilling to send troops to help me retake the fiefdom, that's fine. I request to recall the knights who were recruited to the front line, and return with me to Fingigan City to fight a decisive battle with that hateful Mage Lord." A regiment composed of 2,000 regular knights, plus a large number of experienced mercenaries to cooperate, is a force that cannot be underestimated anywhere in St. Valen. Duke Ralph naturally has the confidence. The Archbishop frowned and said impatiently, "Our war with Darius is at a critical juncture. Even the holy city of Gowers is continuously sending reinforcements, but Your Excellency the Duke wants to withdraw his knights at this time." He paused, looked around at the dignitaries and said angrily, "What? You are going to sit back and watch His Majesty the Archduke and the Church be defeated, and those lawless spellcasters of the Federation will make a comeback and repeat the mistakes of the outbreak of the plague in the royal capital, right?" The ministers looked at each other and lowered their heads. Compared to the arrogant spellcasters, of course the Church that is closer to the nobles is worth joining forces with, especially since they can always respond to requests in times of crisis. Grand Duke Ralph was relentless. "But you're just going to ignore our rear? Fingigan City is indeed my good fiefdom, but that damn Mage Lord occupied it. Together with the Grizzly territory on the northern border, this is a full one-third of the Principality's territory, He glanced at the archbishop and snorted coldly, "Moreover, I heard that the Mage Lord is extremely hostile to the church. Whether it's your priest stationed there or the knights of the Inquisition sent over, all have been expelled, detained, or even hanged in public." These words finally made a young high-ranking priest behind the bishop speak up. "Your Excellency the Duke, if you were not unwilling to listen to the advice of Bishop Fingidun and insisted on sending troops to harass the surrounding people before the other party showed any hostility, which eventually led to the annihilation of the so-called special force in the northern border, Fingidun City would not have fallen so easily, right?" His Majesty the Grand Duke had indeed instructed him to keep a close eye on the Mage Lord on the northern border, but Duke Ralph, always confident of his immense power, took him for granted, treating him as mere prey to be exploited and plundered. His defeat was truly unjust. The Church and St. Valen's coalition forces had originally planned to suppress the Union forces in Darius before turning their attention to the Mage Lord on the northern border. This strategy was also thwarted by Duke Ralph's underestimation of the enemy and his reckless advance. Now the situation had reversed, leaving them vulnerable to attack from both sides. But there is no need to panic. Our Judgment Legion stationed in Isengard and Gorth is always on standby and can quickly reinforce the battle on the border of St. Valen at any time. Before he could finish his words to comfort everyone, a combat priest in charge of intelligence transmission hurried to see him. "Archbishop, my lords, we have received intelligence that in the fallen Fingidun city, the pagan, the wizard Lord Harvey is continuously sending reinforcements to the city through the Ralph River. Fingidun City is located in the plains in the central part of St. Valen. The Ralph River runs across it from east to west, and there is also a straight river running from north to south. There is no doubt, the other party's action is aimed at the royal capital Jinhu City, which is located just downstream of Fingidun City. Can you estimate the current enemy strength in Fingidun City? The enemy's soldiers are not stationed in the city, but have set up a heavily fortified camp at the riverbank dock. Our spies have no idea what's going on inside, but judging by the ships that have arrived in the past few days, there are at least 3,000 troops." The archbishop narrowed his eyes and asked, "It is said that the soldiers under the command of the Mage Lord all fight on foot. There are no regular knights or extraordinary warriors. They only rely on a magical weapon that can attack from a distance to kill the enemy." The young high-ranking priest who spoke earlier seemed to understand this quite well and took the initiative to explain. "Your Excellency, the soldiers under his command are indeed mortals, but the weapons they use seem to be provided by the Federation, similar to the magical weapons they used against the demons in the Evil Moon Mountains." He paused, then glanced at Duke Ralph with disdain before continuing, "As for the battle that took Fingidun City, the rumored powerful magical weapon capable of causing a violent explosion was simply the work of spies who had preemptively planted dragon flame powder at the Fingidun City gates and in the barracks. Once detonated, the defenders were thrown into disarray, unable to mount an effective defense and were instantly defeated." His words were, of course, a subtle dig at Duke Ralph himself, mocking his cowardly act of abandoning the city and seeking refuge alone in the capital. The group discussed the potential for further conflict, but the Minister of State suddenly tugged at Duke Ralph's sleeve. He immediately understood and exclaimed, "Did you notice? After all, they still won't let us see your Majesty." Chapter 440 Prelude to War. Duke Ralph's shout immediately brought everyone back to their senses, and the crux of the matter returned to the question of meeting His Majesty in person. Seeing the crowd's surging emotions, which seemed to be growing increasingly uncontrollable, the Archbishop curled his lips impatiently and said, "If you absolutely must see His Majesty, then follow me. Once you see me, you will understand my intentions." Without even turning back, he turned and walked towards the inner court. The confidential ministers quickly followed, with Duke Ralph leading the way. They proceeded directly to His Majesty's chambers. The knights guarding the gates, recognizing that they were all important figures, knelt on one knee in greeting. Only after obtaining the Archbishop's permission did they open the chamber door. Ralph spotted the Archduke of St. Valen lying on the luxurious bed, his face pale and eyes closed. He rushed forward and exclaimed in shock, "Your Majesty, what happened to him? Why is he unconscious?" The ministers gathered around. "How could this be? Your Majesty. How was your Majesty injured? Why did you keep it a secret for so long?" The Archbishop sighed deeply, his gaze full of meaning as he looked at the startled Duke Ralph. "Your Excellency, do you think you are the only one assassinated by a spellcaster?" Everyone gasped. His Majesty had also been assassinated by a spellcaster, and it seemed he wasn't as lucky as Duke Ralph. While he didn't die instantly, He was seriously injured and unconscious, and it seemed there was no sign of recovery. The young high-ranking priest said arrogantly, "If it weren't for the archbishop and several high priests from the holy city, who take turns casting high-level divine spells every 7 days to prolong His Majesty's life, His Majesty wouldn't have survived this long, and you wouldn't have seen him again." Duke Ralph narrowed his eyes in panic and spoke slowly. "The Union, and that Mage Lord Harvey, are they planning to completely wipe out all the nobles and royal family in St. Valen? Had the spellcaster's hostility towards the nobles reached this point? Even His Majesty, the Grand Duke, was not immune to assassination attempts." The dignitaries present broke out in a cold sweat. The Archbishop then spoke slowly. "Everyone, are you still unwilling to cooperate with us to fight these evil spellcasters who have betrayed secular authority and faith in the gods?" After the Mage Lord captured the nobles' territory, he hanged not only the church clergy but also the nobles who refused to submit to him, in the royal capital of St. Valen, a street-side apartment in Jinhu City. Ever since Harvey launched a surprise attack on Fingagan City and successfully captured Duke Ralph's fiefdom, the status of the capital's intelligence chief, codenamed 007, has skyrocketed. He was naturally promoted to the position of Chief of Intelligence for St. Valen. Even his colleagues in charge of Fingagan City spoke highly of him, and the intelligence network he painstakingly cultivated within Jinhu City has truly solidified. Beyond the core intelligence personnel originally from Xinghuo City, nearly a year of operations has allowed 007 to covertly extend his reach into all walks of life in the royal capital. As the director of trade for the Pharaoh's Royal Chamber of Commerce, he mingled with the upper echelons of the royal aristocracy and wealthy, becoming exceptionally sensitive to all gossip circulating within the royal court. At the same time, he also used coercion and inducement to actually control a medium-powered black street gang in the downtown area. He had spies among the thugs, beggars, prostitutes and pickpockets. He could get money just by inquiring and passing on information, and these untouchables living at the bottom of the society didn't care who they worked for. His Majesty the Grand Duke was assassinated and seriously injured, and the church is claiming among the powerful that it was us who did it. 007 slammed the water glass on the table and sneered. Ever since the outbreak of the plague, their methods of framing and slandering have remained the same. Anvil himself was a direct victim of the outbreak of the plague. He couldn't help but clench his fists and said angrily, "These despicable and shameless charlatans." He suppressed his anger and continued to report the information he had learned from Duke Ralph's nephew. "Right now, the church has temporarily united the nobles of Jinhu City, and they are ready to deal with the city lord's army coming from Fingagan City." Duke Ralph volunteered to lead a royal guard of several hundred people to the Alva River section to block the river. They planned to use dragon flame powder to blow up the already narrow and rocky estuary, completely blocking a route to the royal capital by water. 007 tapped the table lightly. "Has the news been repeatedly confirmed?" According to the intelligence verification process, 3 confirmations, Anvil said seriously and businesslike. "I heard it from the children of the nobles." Another intelligence officer, codenamed Groundhog, learned the same news from a soldier in the Royal City Guard whom he had befriended. That guard was one of the individuals chosen for this assignment. Furthermore, a female intelligence officer, codenamed Spider, had also heard similar rumors from the gossip of a prominent figure involved in the incident. 007 hummed a satisfied sigh. "Have the gang rats at the docks keep a close eye on these men and report to me immediately if they make any moves." Blocking the river wasn't good news for the intelligence officers in Jinhu City. The Lord's army certainly didn't mind attacking the capital from the water, but if the river was severely damaged, the vast majority of merchant ships heading north from the western border would be stopped at Jinhu City, making it difficult to supply the border regions with the goods they lacked. Furthermore, reopening the river would be a complex undertaking. If he failed to prevent this reckless act, as the head of intelligence, he would likely bear some responsibility for his dereliction of duty. After finishing his most important business, Anvil pursed his lips and said bitterly, "They're forcibly conscripting civilians everywhere around the capital and sending them to the border. The war with Dalius has been going on for over 6 months, and we've only seen people leave, never return. This kind of common knowledge isn't considered valuable intelligence." 007 was stunned. To prevent betrayal and exposure, intelligence officers kept each other's personal information secret. "Do you have any relatives in the countryside? Were they also forcibly conscripted?" Anvil's eyes welled up, and he smiled bitterly. "My lord, they're all dead. They didn't make it north when the plague broke out." His superior was at a loss for words of comfort, and just as he was feeling awkward, A faint beeping sound came from the bedroom. 007 immediately stood up and slipped into the bedroom, skillfully pulling out a magic brain communication device from under the bed. It was a direct order from Spark City. He took a quick glance, and his heart skipped a beat. When he pushed open the bedroom door again and walked out, an irrepressible smile was already on his face. Teashan hurriedly stepped forward and asked, "Sir, do you have any new mission instructions?" "Ha ha ha." 007 couldn't help laughing, his tone filled with unspeakable joy and excitement. "Don't worry about them blowing up the river." Teashan was in high spirits. "Will reinforcements come and help us stop them?" "No, no, no." 007 shook his head and said bluntly, "The City Lord's army has already set out from Fingigan City and is sailing downstream on ironclad ships. The nobles may not be able to block the river in time, and they will have to watch the City Lord's army approach the city with their own eyes." Chapter 441, Lion of the North, Part 1. Standing on the bow of the ironclad, Harvey gazed at the long fleet arrayed in a V-shape behind him. A wave of emotion washed over him. Aside from the previous Fingigan City raid, this expedition to the royal capital, Jinhu City, was truly his personal expedition. While still manipulating soul puppets, the high-ranking officials and officers of Jinhu City would never allow their city lord to risk his life. He was aboard a modified ironclad, temporarily serving as the city lord's flagship. Compared to ordinary ships equipped with single-cylinder Mana engines, this one was not only larger but also featured a dual-unit propulsion system, allowing it to sail much faster through the river. The flagship's onboard weaponry included a Mana cannon at both the bow and stern, along with a Mana machine gun mounted on each side. These were mounted on circular metal capstans, allowing for flexible firing angles and providing a virtually unobstructed barrage of fire. Behind the flagship were 7 or 8 conventional ironclads, each decked with heavily armed soldiers. The fleet sailed along the broad Ralph River, stirring the waters to a turbulent pitch, further highlighting the unstoppable momentum of this fleet, a true river master. "What's the royal capital, Golden Glory City, like?" Battalion Commander Dafu asked with longing. "Could it be more prosperous and bustling than our Spark City?" Guard Captain Tommy smiled and said, "No way. Aside from the magical capital of Alair, there's no city in the south more prosperous and affluent than our Spark City," Wayne quickly chimed in. They had accompanied Harvey on his personal journey to Alair, making them among the rare Northern Army members who had seen the world, and therefore held a more informed opinion. "Tisk, I really want to see what those large, populous cities in the south are like," Vaughn muttered, adding quietly, "but not like Grizzly Castle and Fingigan City. After we conquered them, the number of orcs and other mixed-race people in Spark City was not insignificant. Most of the human refugees had lived and multiplied in the northern wastes for centuries, and to some extent, they possessed a bit of mixed blood, resulting in a distinct appearance and stature from those of the south, the primary reason for their discrimination and expulsion. Half-orcs like Vaughn and Dave, with their ferocious, bestial features, were even less likely to be accepted by the south and allowed to walk openly on the streets of human cities." Harvey heard the whispers of his direct officers behind him, turned around and said with a smile, "After we capture the royal capital and end this dispute between mortals and spellcasters, I will issue a decree throughout St. Valen. From now on, whether it is orcs or other half-bloods from the northern wastelands, they can live equally and freely in the southern border like everyone else, and will never be enslaved or discriminated against again." These words naturally attracted many half-blood and half-orc officers behind him to kneel on one knee and salute their chests. Many of them looked at the lord they were loyal to with fiery eyes, their eyes full of excitement and fanaticism. Commander Pierce hurried onto the flagship's deck. "Sir, over 10 miles away, on the Alva River, there's indeed a fleet from Jinhu City stationed there. It matches the intelligence reports, 6 sloops, flying the insignia of the Royal City Guard." Harvey nodded in acknowledgement, then turned and entered the ship's command room, a small, less than 6 meters square room, containing a simple, long conference table fixed to the floor with a map of the river spread out on it. Commander Pierce, Captain Tommy of the Royal Guard, Vaughn and Wayne, commanders of the 1st and 2nd Battalions of the Northern Army, along with Deputy Captain Duff of the Special Operations Team and Artillery Battalion Commander Bobcat, lined up on either side of Harvey, formulating a simple battle plan for the upcoming encounter. Such drastic measures wouldn't have been necessary to deal with a few sloops, but intelligence reports from the capital indicated that while the fleet's crew consisted of a small number of soldiers, each vessel was heavily loaded with flammable and explosive materials like dragon flame powder, kerosene, and whale blubber. This posed a significant risk, whether engaged in long-range bombardment or close-up boarding operations. If the enemy were cornered, they would likely detonate their ships and destroy the river mouth, effectively blocking Harvey's fleet's route to Jinhu City. Sir, if we can lure them out of the river mouth and destroy them directly with artillery fire from the wide river, wouldn't that eliminate the need for concern? Von's thoughts were as straightforward as his mind. Wayne said in a deep voice, how to lure them out? The river channel in the Alva area is flat and the view is wide. The enemy can spot our traces from a distance. How could they dare to get close easily? Unless we open fire from a very long distance before they find us. The artillery battalion commander Bobcat shook his head and said, my lord city lord, commanders, it is difficult for our naval guns to hit moving targets at long distances. This is not a problem of lack of ability. It is a double problem that the enemy ships and our ships are moving at the same time. Our hit rate will be greatly reduced, Pierce said with a gloomy face. Then tell me, how close do we need to get to fire and hit? Bobcat shrank his neck, stretched out 3 fingers and answered cautiously, 300 meters. Within 300 meters, even if it is a moving target, I can guarantee that I can sink an enemy ship with one shot. Duff sneered, and said in a muffled voice, do you still need your artillery battalion for 300 meters? Our special operations team will ambush underwater in advance. Isn't it better to wait for them to get close and fight directly on board the ship? What if the enemy gets desperate and sets themselves on fire? Won't you all get blown up along with them? Harvey frowned, turning to look at the midshipmen, Gooters, huddled in a corner of the command room. Indeed, Harvey had brought his Mongolian navy along for this foreign mission, primarily to give them experience in naval warfare. Gooters, what do you think? A chorus of higher-ranking officers from Spark City turned to look at him, instantly leaving the veteran helmsman, a former first mate on a merchant ship, digging his toes in nervousness. Harvey waved his hand and soothed him, it's okay, just speak freely. After all, you are the one who has real experience in sailing on the rivers in the Southern Territory. You must have often encountered conflicts with pirates and the like, right? Tommy whispered teasingly, being the target of robbery for many years, is it also considered a kind of water combat experience? Lord Mayor, Gooters, a trainee officer who didn't have a ship, felt a little guilty. He hesitated for a long time before cautiously suggesting, I think, we should disguise ourselves as a large merchant ship loaded with valuable cargo, lure them to leave the river mouth on their own initiative, and come to rob us. Vaughn and Dave stared. Gooters quickly added, except for the City Lord's flagship, the other ironclad ships are of the same specifications as ordinary 3-masted sailing ships. As long as they raise the masts and hang fake sails, they can easily be mistaken for large merchant ships. When they can't bear it and get close to the bombardment range, we will immediately open fire and sink them in the middle of the wide river, and they will no longer be able to block the river mouth. Wayne asked in a deep voice, that is the ship of the Royal City Guard. Why would they rob passing merchant ships like ordinary pirates? Gooters smiled bitterly, sir, the Royal City Guard is the largest pirate organization on the Ralph River. They really disdain ordinary small merchant ships, because only the fleets of large chambers of commerce are regarded as fat meat. Even if the Royal Chamber of Commerce of other countries passes by, they will, politely, board the ship and charge a hefty toll. Tommy cursed disdainfully, shameless and greedy aristocratic army. Harvey and Pierce looked at each other and said in unison, this plan is good, let's do it, pass on my orders. The City Lord's flagship lowers its stern, and the other secondary ships advance forward. The 4 leading ships raise their masts and sails, and pile their decks with ballast and military supplies to disguise them as merchant ships laden with cargo. Chapter 442, Lion of the North, Part 2. The fleet sent by the Royal City Guard to block the Alva River was nominally commanded by Duke Ralph, but in reality, all the soldiers were under the command of Captain Quick. Quick was a knight of the highest order. His father was a landless baron of the court, so his title was naturally not his to inherit. As an honorary title, it was only the lowest rank among the nobility. Being able to fly Duke Ralph's banner and follow him in the mission of blocking the river and stopping the enemy, Quick considered himself to have scored a great bargain. Not only would he be indispensable in future meritorious service, but he would also be able to profit handsomely from the merchant fleet simply by blocking the river. The other nobles naturally couldn't bring themselves to collect tolls from the merchant fleet, but Quick didn't care at all. Ordinary merchant fleets naturally wouldn't dare offend the Royal City Guard. Even if they encountered a noble or royal merchant fleet from another nation, They still had the prestigious shield of Duke Ralph. As long as they weren't overly greedy, Quick and his trusted men could not only successfully complete the task of blocking the river mouth, but also seize the opportunity to make a fortune. Returning to the capital with this substantial profit, he would allocate some to honor the powerful and influential figures in the royal court, asking them to actively lobby for him, perhaps even earning the title of a true hereditary noble. Thinking of this, Quick couldn't help but glance at Duke Ralph, who sat drinking beside him. Yesterday, they had intercepted a merchant fleet flying the flag of Maple Leaf City, the Duchy of Barclay. Although the leader of the other caravan repeatedly claimed to have a business partnership with a baron in Golden Glory City, Quick still insisted that they hadn't been informed in advance and detained the fleet for an entire night. He eventually forced the fleet to pay a 50 gold toll. The soldiers also took away several barrels of fine wine, clearly intended for the upper class. Duke Ralph, always a fond drinker, turned a blind eye and tacitly approved of their blatant extortion and occupation of the river. Quick thought, it seems that this once renowned Duke of Ligo, now without his fiefdom and knightly order, has lost much of his spirit. A soldier on guard duty came running down from the deck. "Captain, there's another fleet approaching on the river from the east." "East?" Duke Ralph put down his glass, stood up, and asked, "Did you see clearly? Is it a warship or a merchant ship? Are there any sails?" Quick took the telescope handed to him by his subordinates, walked onto the deck, and looked up. In the summer, the Ralph River was covered with mist. Although it was a long distance away, he could vaguely see the enemy's ship with a tall mast and 3 sails blowing in the wind. A 3-masted sailing ship. Either it is the Grand Chamber of Commerce in Orland, or it must be the royal caravan of the Central Countries. "Your Excellency," the Duke said, "that the ship our enemies are riding on is a strange sailless ship." Quick rubbed his hands with a smile and ordered his men, "Go down and tell the Duke that it is not an enemy attack, but a merchant fleet from another country passing by. This is a big fat sheep." "Boss, why did they stop suddenly?" the trusted deputy suddenly asked in confusion. Quick quickly raised his telescope and looked again, only to discover that the fleet had suddenly slowed down less than 3 miles from the river's mouth, coming to a complete stop in the middle of the river. The lead ship then slowly turned sideways, as if relying on inertia to turn around. "Oh no! Have they spotted us?" Quick slapped his thigh, anxious and furious. "We've only been holding out here for 2 days, and they've already gotten wind of it." His deputy pondered for a moment and speculated, could it be that the leader of the Maple Leaf City merchant fleet leaked the news yesterday? These caravans have always maintained close ties, and they all use carrier pigeons to transmit urgent messages. Damn it! This must be it. We can't let this fat sheep get away. Quick waved his hand and shouted, "Warn everyone. Hoist the sails and row. We'll chase them, flank them, and intercept this caravan." The 3-masted galleons were as fast as a tortoise, but the Royal City Guard's 2-masted shuttle warships were several times faster. With just sails and rowing, they could stop the enemy in a matter of moments. The captain personally gave the order, and the 6 brigs guarding the river mouth sprang into action. No one wanted to stay put, fearing they would miss out if they were too slow. Suddenly, they engaged in a fierce race across the river. As the brigs drew closer, the massive 3-masted galleon, completely sideways in the center of the river, became visible ahead. Quick frowned, his mouth agape. "Oh my god! What the hell is this?" The ship's hull was sleek and pitch black, with a faint metallic sheen. Its sharp bow, like a shuttle, was crowned by a massive wedge-shaped ram. Its entire hull was more than halfway down the water. Just looking at it gave one an inkling of the weight of this strange iron vessel. The crude masts, barely even painted with tune oil, and the seemingly out-of-place sails and tarpaulins on the deck seemed incompatible with the iron ship itself. This was no ordinary merchant ship. Suddenly, a series of dull roars like rolling thunder echoed in their ears, followed by the crackling of the hull breaking and snapping. A leading shuttle warship, as if struck by an invisible wave, capsized and rolled sideways, sending the soldiers on the deck careening into the water. "It's the enemy. They're coming from Fingigan City." Duke Ralph, trailing behind the fleet, finally recovered his composure. Recognizing the ironclad ship disguised as a sailing ship, he shouted a warning to Quick, who was on the other ship. "They have terrifying magical weapons on board. Follow me, turn back to the river mouth, blow up the river, and then retreat." Quick's ship, fortunately unattacked, swallowed hard, gazing at the other warships huddled together in their haste to turn around. Through gritted teeth, he ordered, "These idiots have completely blocked our retreat. There's no time to turn around. Let's talk. Rumor has it that this wizard lord from the north possesses many powerful and terrifying magical weapons. To engage them rashly would be a sure death. However, their target was undoubtedly the more powerful Duke Ralph. The iron ships would undoubtedly pursue him to the river mouth to prevent him from destroying the river. If they didn't flee now, they would have no chance later. Quick pushed away his panicked trusted deputy, ran to the stern to take the helm, and shouted at the top of his lungs, "Paddle hard. Go to the shore. Go straight to the beach and don't worry about running aground." The soldiers on the deck were in chaos, but many of them returned to the lower cabin, picked up the oars and paddled hard. Quick looked behind him in panic, and saw the two warships that had just been hit hard. A huge hole appeared in the middle of the hull, hitting the waterline, and the cold river water was rushing into the cabin frantically. Those soldiers rowing in the cabin were undoubtedly the most unfortunate. They were attacked by some weapon from hundreds of meters away from the enemy ship, which broke the hull and exploded inside the warship. Sticky blood and broken internal organs and flesh of the dead were almost everywhere, dyeing the river water around the warship bright red. Those on deck suffered equally. If flung overboard, they had a chance to swim to shore and escape, but those pinned down by broken or collapsed vessels would inevitably be buried along with the rapidly sinking ship. The screams of the wounded mingled with the cries of those drowning, while intermittent flashes of red light flickered from the bow and stern of the opposing iron ship, followed by a roar of muffled thunder. The warships huddled together in the middle of the river were repeatedly struck. Several, already laden with kerosene and dragon fire powder, were even blasted apart, erupting into a blazing flame. As the final roar struck, Quick watched, his hands and feet cold, as Duke Ralph's ship, which had been fleeing the fastest, was struck squarely aft, its massive rudder blasted into the air. Chapter 443, Enemy at the Gate, Part 1. The spindle-shaped warship was originally the most agile and swift vessel on inland rivers. However, its uniquely slender hull made it prone to swaying when making sudden stops and turns in the river. If several warships were forced to turn simultaneously, the situation would be a complete chaos, with no one able to move. A spindle ship, which had narrowly escaped the bombardment, was caught off guard by the frantic helmsman, and collided with another ship behind it. The combined force of the current and the impact caused the bow to buckle and crush the other ship's deck, shattering the dozens of long oars protruding from the ship's belly. Soldiers and sailors leaped overboard to escape, while those whose limbs were broken by the shattered deck and collapsed masts could only scream and writhe on the sinking deck, leaving behind a trailing trail of blood. Quick's warship had finally escaped the center of the river and was about to turn and charge toward the shore when suddenly, behind the massive enemy ship, a slightly smaller, equally dark iron vessel emerged. The enemy seemed to have set their sights on Quick's rat, which had just broken away from the battle group, and was pursuing them at incredible speed. Seeing their ship's speed far outpacing the enemy's pursuit, Quick, in despair, suddenly realized that the ship didn't seem to be equipped with its terrifying magical weapons. He snatched the telescope from his deputy and peered closely, discovering that the weapons emitting continuous flames were fixed to the stern and bow of the iron ship. The stern weapons naturally couldn't reach them from that angle. Several unarmored soldiers gathered around the bow weapons, seemingly circling anxiously. Their magical weapons were malfunctioning. Quick took a deep breath, feeling a sense of opportunity. If he simply abandoned his ship and fled back to the capital, even if he managed to survive, he would be guilty of a crime punishable by hanging for abandoning Duke Ralph, and his chances of being granted a hereditary nobility would be naught. His only chance was to launch a counterattack. Even if he could only sink or defeat one enemy ship, he could claim credit for it back at the royal court. While the other warships lay doomed, at least he, Quick, could fight bravely and destroy one enemy vessel. This was the Wizard Lord's magical ship. Their magic weapons are ineffective. If you don't want to die, take up your bows and crossbows, Quick shouted hoarsely. The enemies on the ship are flesh and blood like us, they're not even wearing armor. Follow me aboard their ship and slaughter these cowards hiding in their shells. He slapped the purse at his waist and said, anyone who comes aboard with me will be rewarded with a gold pound. If you kill one enemy, I will request a knighthood from your majesty's chief knight on his behalf. The dual lure of money and fame in the capital intoxicated these guardsmen, accustomed to oppressing the weak, extorting, and plundering, in the capital. Even if the money wasn't the motivation, the promise of knighthood was enough to make them take a risk. Just before a head-on collision with the enemy ship, the warship nimbly turned sideways to the port of the ironclad. The two ships were almost parallel in the river, only a few meters apart. The soldiers held up the rigging and long hooks commonly used in boarding operations, ready to quickly bring the two ships together and then board and engage. At that moment, a row of soldiers, uniformly dressed in black, stood on the enemy ship's deck, all displaying a remarkably consistent expression, a grin of disdain. Then, in unison, these black-clad soldiers raised their strange, long, silver iron pipes. Before Quinn could react, a blinding white light erupted from the tip of the pipe. A cloud of blood erupted from the soldiers gathered on the deck, preparing to board the ship. Splinters of mast and blood splattered everywhere, and the guardsmen fell to the deck like ears of wheat cut by an invisible scythe. Those who reacted immediately tumbled and began to seek cover. Many scrambled to get into the hold. Quick himself, pulled by his deputy, huddled behind a massive mast, finding a moment to catch his breath. But soon, the humming of weapons intensified. Quick couldn't help but poke his head slightly out, and spotted a strangely shaped weapon mid-deck on the enemy ship. It looked remarkably like the dragon flamethrowers on the walls of the capital, only the nozzle was thicker and longer, and the flames emitted a similar orange-red glow. Behind the iron pipe was clearly another ordinary enemy soldier, but he seemed uninterested in targeting the surviving enemies on the deck. Instead, he grimly thrust the iron weapon towards the ship's hull below, slowly moving from left to right. He intended to penetrate the thick hull and strike those hiding within. Just as Quick had predicted, the sound of the hull shattering was incessant. Even across the deck, he could hear the horrific sound of flesh being torn apart. Those below didn't even have time to scream. The direction the iron pipe pointed seemed to be where the Grim Reaper had swung his scythe. By the time it had swept across the hull and returned to the deck, even the mast, unable to withstand the terrifying magical attack, collapsed with a creaking crash. Quick tried to dodge, but just as he rolled out of the direction of the fallen mast, he was instantly engulfed in a hail of magical bullets. Lord, the soldiers cleaning up the battlefield have pulled up a body dressed in rich attire from the river. It appears to be the enemy leader, Harvey, standing on the deck of the main ship, glanced slightly sideways. Perhaps a noble from the capital, leading this fleet to intercept us. In reality, Harvey didn't know any of the nobles. No matter how prominent their family or how noble their status, he crudely divided them into two categories. One category consisted of those like the new Earl of Fagin, the Shepherd Knight, and Sir Ross, who could reform and show some potential for training. The other category consisted of those like the one before him, those who stubbornly resisted, their fate naturally destined for death on the battlefield or at the execution ground after a public trial. Wayne walked forward to take a look with some doubt, then leaned close to Harvey's ear and whispered, "Sir, this guy looks familiar, I seem to have seen him." "It seems to be Duke Ralph." Harvey was speechless and said, "Really? I carefully observed him through the alchemical side of the sniper magic gun. His figure and appearance are indeed similar to Duke Ralph." Wayne was a little annoyed. "It's a pity that Mr. Illusion Eye and Ms. Astrologer are not here, otherwise they will definitely be able to recognize him. Let him be the Duke. There is no need to capture him alive anyway." Harvey waved his hand indifferently, and then ordered Pierce. "We are very close to the royal capital, Jinhu City. Let our fleet sail at full speed. At dawn tomorrow, let us knock on the door of the royal capital directly." Chapter 444, Enemy at the Gate, Part 2. Lord, the capital is truly strange. The dock isn't built outside the city, but directly into the city from the river. Captain Tommy, the personal guard in charge of enemy surveillance, exclaimed in astonishment. "They built a dock right inside the city?" "Oh," Harvey was slightly surprised, but then realized it made sense. After all, Jinhu City is located in the peaceful and stable central part of the continent. Aside from occasional attacks from the fell orcs in the northern borderlands, it has arguably never experienced war in its over 100 years of existence. Besides being the capital of the Principality of St. Valen, it's practically an upgraded version of Thingin City, with nearly double the population. Furthermore, successive Grand Dukes of St. Valen have maintained close ties with the Church of Glory, each crowned Grand Duke by the Pope. The Cathedral of Glory within Jinhu City is the most magnificent structure built in the entire central southern region, rivaling the Cathedral of Grace in the holy city of Gowers in prestige. Yet, this prosperous capital, rarely experiencing war and a place where the people lived in peace and contentment, was repeatedly plagued by the machinations of the church and the greed of the nobility. First, a nationwide plague of corruption struck, bringing untold suffering to countless civilians. Then, conflicts with spellcasters were initiated, leaving the people suffering from heavy taxes and forced labor during the wars with neighboring nations. From the perspective of a spellcaster, Harvey naturally couldn't understand the intentions and goals of Grand Duke St. Valen's alliance with the Church. He would never believe that it was purely out of unwavering faith and devotion to the Holy See. A king or Grand Duke, holding high positions of secular power, wouldn't be so blindly credulous and devout. Now, intelligence sources in the royal capital have reported that the Grand Duke, like Duke Ralph, has been assassinated by a spellcaster. Harvey and Asdalen concluded that the entire capital of Golden Glory City has likely fallen completely under the control of the Church. According to the agreement reached with the three chiefs of the Union before the expedition, Harvey's high-profile military operation was aimed at swiftly capturing Golden Radiant City, forcing the lords and princes stationed on the border to withdraw their troops and return to the capital. Freed from the need to contend with mortal armies, the Union's Mage warband could focus on countering pressure from the Church. However, the chiefs also issued a stern warning to Harvey: if the siege of Golden Radiant City proved unsustainable, within 2 weeks, he would face reinforcements from the Church's Judgment Army, dispatched from Goris or Isengard. The Union would then be unable to spare the resources to rescue him from both sides. Unsustainable? Within 2 weeks, Pierce scoffed grimly. Attacked from all sides? Those mages of the Union truly underestimate you. He clenched his fists against his chest, knelt on one knee, and pleaded with Harvey: "Sir, please allow me to assume command immediately. Once we reach the capital at dawn, it will only take half a day. I will capture the gates for you." Harvey felt a mixture of amusement and embarrassment. The Union looked down on him. How dare they entrust him with such a heavy task as attacking a capital? And if they valued him, then he worried he'd lose the battle and be trapped by the Church's reinforcements. Don't underestimate the enemy for a quarrel of egos. Arrive outside the capital at dawn tomorrow, and I want you to hold your ground. Just one thing. Pierce frowned, puzzled. What do you want me to do? Beat the gate with cannons? As the night deepened, while the northern frontier fleet was still steaming along the Ralph River, dozens of miles from the capital, a fleet of even faster special forces had already arrived on the outskirts of Golden Glory City. After completing the annihilation operation at the mouth of the Alva River, the ironclad ship temporarily docked to unload a squad of 50 bloodline warriors. The Special Operations Team, led by Vaughn and Dave, rode incredibly swift off-road magic scooters and sped through the wilderness to the capital. They were here to conduct advance reconnaissance of the capital and map the battlefield terrain, and if necessary, they would sneak into the city to collaborate with intelligence personnel. "Boss, there's a group of militia-looking men outside the city gates, busily moving and filling something." Vaughn nodded. "Are there any soldiers stationed on the riverbank?" "Militia too, like us, without even armor. I see they're poorly equipped, with many carrying only sharpened wooden spears." Dave rubbed his hands and enthusiastically suggested, "How about we practice on these little rats? They'd be as easy to crush as an ant." Vaughn immediately shook his head, sensing something was amiss. News of Duke Ralph's death had been deliberately relayed back to the capital. Logically, the nobles of Jinhu City would have deployed defenses along the riverbanks leading into the city to prevent the city lord's fleet from entering directly. Even if they didn't heavily garrison the riverbanks, the waterway gates should have been manned. Wouldn't these nobles' traditional method of combating the enemy be to deploy large numbers of archers and kerosene logs, or even to mount catapults from the city walls to launch a counterattack from above? But now, the enemy seemed to have abandoned the terrain advantage of their first line of defense, retreating directly to the inner city, leaving them with a safe landing site. This seemed logical in every way. Wait a little longer, wait until they leave in the middle of the night, and then we'll see what traps these militiamen have laid on the riverbank. And just as Vaughn had predicted, in the middle of the night, after the laborers and soldiers had left, they snuck onto the riverbank near the waterway gates and dug out bucket after bucket of sealed black powder from a hastily buried pit. "Wow! Dragon flame powder." Dave widened his eyes and stuck out his tongue. "The nobles of the royal city have really spent a lot of money to resist our attack. The dragon flame powder produced by the Alchemy Exploration Society has a complex formula and is very expensive. It is not expensive to add a small amount to spellcasting materials and magic ammunition, but burying whole barrels of it underground and using it as landmines is indeed a bit of a waste." Vaughn scratched his head and speculated, "I heard that when spellcasters were expelled from St. Valen, alchemists were also brutally persecuted. I'm guessing these were confiscated by the church and nobles. They certainly don't know their true purpose and are just using them as simple explosives. Let's dig them all up and take them away." Vaughn shook his head. "How can we carry hundreds of barrels? Take this intelligence back, the city lord and the commander will know how to respond. At dawn, the soldiers on the royal city walls immediately spotted dozens of thick white columns of smoke drifting across the Ralph River in the distance. The northern mage lord and his armored fleet were bearing down on the capital. News of the enemy's presence quickly reached the royal court in the inner city. Archbishop St. Valens stood grimly beside the throne, gazing down at the gloomy ministers and dignitaries below. "What are you panicking about?" he snorted with extreme impatience. "Our walls are strong, our troops are plentiful, and the only breach in the waterway is saturated with dragon flame powder. If that pagan fleet dares to sail through the land and water gates, we will immediately detonate the walls on both sides, burying their flagship beneath a 1,000-pound rubble. As long as the city remains unbroken, reinforcements from the holy city will arrive in 10 days at most. He'll want to see how the mortal soldiers under the Mage Lord can hold their own against the transcendent warriors of the holy city's Inquisition army." Before he could continue his rebuke of these clueless ministers, a dull rumble of thunder suddenly echoed from the distant outer city, rumbling across the sky. Soon after, a dusty knight from the royal guard rushed into the palace and threw himself at the archbishop's feet. "Your Excellency! This is bad. They didn't enter the city directly through the waterway. Instead, they used some unknown method from a distance to detonate the dragon flame powder buried on both sides of the riverbank, collapsing a section of the city wall." "What?" the nobles present all gasped. "They don't plan to enter the city directly through the waterway," the archbishop swallowed hard and asked in disbelief. The knight's voice trembled. "The waterway has collapsed. They landed directly outside the city." Thousands of black-clad soldiers went straight to the land gate half a mile away and set up a siege formation. At this time, a high-ranking priest in a white robe hurried in and handed a piece of snow-white letter paper to the bishop. The envelope was stamped with the seal of the Federation and a strange emblem in the shape of a towering castle and a golden star. This wizard lord of the north was clearly telling them that he was joining hands with the Federation in this attack on the king. The bishop tore open the envelope with a stern face and unfolded the thin piece of letter paper inside. He found that it was written in the common language of the South with an extremely simple, yet extremely arrogant and glaring word. "Open the door." Chapter 445, Battle of the Royal Capital. In a tower atop the western wall of the royal capital, Dickinson, Grand Duke St. Valens' chief knight, paced anxiously, occasionally taking a telescope from a subordinate to observe the enemy's movements outside. Frankly, Dickinson himself couldn't understand how the situation in the duchy had reached its current state. Leveraging the extraordinary abilities of the Union spellcasters to consolidate his rule, relying on the Church's spread of faith to maintain public stability. As the agent of secular royal power, the Grand Duke should have understood the principle of checks and balances and strived to maintain the fragile peace between the Church and the spellcasters. However, a single plague of corruption, the origin of which was unclear, shattered this balance in an instant. The spellcasters were persecuted and expelled, and the Church suddenly became the sole ruler. Taking advantage of the Grand Duke's severe injuries and coma, the Archbishop suddenly became the de facto ruler of Golden Glory City. Now, he seemed determined to engage the notorious Northern Lord in a life-or-death battle in the royal capital. Caught between the Church and the spellcasters were the wavering nobles, and tens of thousands of innocent civilians, bewildered and helpless. Hearing the rustling of footsteps behind him, Dickinson gathered his thoughts, sighed, and turned, saying, "Your Excellency, there's no need for you to come in person. The enemy outside the city is showing no signs of movement." The middle-aged priest snorted. "The bishop has ordered me to oversee the battle, and I won't tolerate even the slightest bit of laxity. Why are your soldiers in the royal city so timid and demoralized?" Dickinson gave a wry smile, unsure how to explain it. Even when nobles sent their generals into battle, they knew to promise bounties or positions before the battle. At the very least, they would improve their soldiers' food or pay their overdue wages in full. But the Church was completely unwise. They simply relied on words to force these commoners to die for them. Did they truly believe everyone was the devout believers in the holy city, obsessed with doctrine and creed? Rumor has it that the Northern Lord wields a powerful magical weapon capable of instantly inflicting damage from a distance. The soldiers aren't afraid of battle, they simply don't want to die in vain. The priest frowned and rebuked. Ridiculous. Even the most powerful magical weapon requires a spellcaster to operate it. How many spellcasters are there among the pagans from the north? During our border battle with Danius, the Federation sent a mere 300 wizards. 300, only? This 300-plus spellcasters, aided by the alchemists of the Quest Society, held back nearly 1,000 of the church's inquisitors and combat priests, as well as a 3,000 noble coalition sent by all the princes of St. Valen. Of course, Dickinson could only silently grumble about this, not daring to voice his grievances. A knight's highest honor is protection and loyalty. As the Grand Duke's chief knight, he had shouldered the heavy responsibility of defending the capital since his inauguration. Regardless of the cause of the current situation, Dickinson believed he must fulfill this duty. Before ascending the city walls to meet the enemy, he unearthed all the gold and silver coins stored in his mansion and distributed them to his most trusted elite soldiers of the Royal City Guard. This elite force of less than 500 men would be Dickinson's greatest asset in holding the eastern section of the wall. "Sir, the enemy outside the city is on the move, seemingly preparing to attack." Dickinson's retinue ran into the watchtower. The chief knight ignored the supervising priest and decisively declared, "Pass my orders. All soldiers on the western wall, prepare the ballistae and trebuchets, and prepare the kerosene and battering rams." No matter how powerful and terrifying the enemy's magical weapons, they would still need to use flesh and blood to scale the walls. As the siege reached a critical stage, close combat was inevitable. He raised his telescope again, only to discover that the enemy outside the city hadn't immediately retreated. Farther out, on the Ralph River, 9 ironclad ships were lined up parallel to the riverbank. Thick white smoke occasionally billowed from their heads. Without sails or oars, it was unclear how they managed to navigate the river. Fortunately, the waterway leading into the city had collapsed, preventing even the strongest ships from reaching shore to participate in the land siege. "What are those ships planning to do?" the warlord asked, also raising his telescope. "Are they hoping to use their strength to ram through the massive boulders blocking the waterway? Each of those boulders probably weighs over 1,000 pounds. Impossible." Dickinson was also somewhat surprised. Since they had already deployed their siege formation at the city gate, they wouldn't attempt to enter through the waterway. That entire section had collapsed and been filled in. There was no way they could force their way through it with ships. He was about to explain to the war priest when, among the ironclad ships lined up along the riverbank, a brilliant flame suddenly ignited from the forepart of one. It was as bright as the morning sun, then vanished in a flash. A few breaths later, a muffled thunder boomed in Dickinson's ears, accompanied by a massive column of dust rising from the ground less than 5 meters from the city wall. "The enemy has planted dragon flame powder at the foot of the wall." The chief knight's heart sank. He personally inspected every section of the wall daily and assigned trusted soldiers to patrol at night. How had these northerners managed to reach the base of the wall so quietly? Before he could process what had happened, the distant flames flashed again, with the same low roar. But this time the explosion was in the middle of a section of the wall not far from the city gate. Crushing rubble tore through the wall, creating a massive crater. Dickinson could even faintly feel the entire wall tremble slightly from the explosion beneath his feet. "It's not dragon flame powder, it's a magic weapon." The middle-aged priest supervising the battle took a few steps back in disbelief, muttering, "Didn't the people who escaped say the magic weapons they possessed were the silver iron pipes held by those pagans? Why?" At this moment, a thunderbolt struck the top of the city. The roar of the explosion was so loud, as if thunder had exploded directly beside the ears. A section of the battlement of the city wall suddenly shattered into pieces, and countless smoke and stones splashed everywhere. The entire city wall shook and swayed violently. And even the watchtowers were crumbling. Dickinson hurriedly staggered out, holding on to the wall with one hand and the sword with the other, barely avoiding falling. His ears were buzzing, seeing the entire city wall in chaos, but no sound could be heard. The chief knight's respite was brief. After finally regaining a modicum of hearing, he grabbed hold of the fleeing guards and was about to yell at them not to leave their defensive positions on the battlements when thunderclaps, with earth-shattering force, blasted the city walls one after another. Dickinson watched helplessly as the war supervising priest, mere steps away, was instantly shattered in half by a flying rock from nowhere. His body splattered, his brain splattered, and he collapsed limply against the parapet, thick blood gushing down the walls. The distant thunderclap didn't cease, seeming to intensify. He couldn't just sit there and wait for death. The chief knight stumbled to his feet, preparing to descend the city walls. He had stationed a squadron of guards at the gate. As long as they stayed away from the city walls, the magical attacks from afar would be unable to penetrate the walls and penetrate the city. As long as he held the city gate, Suddenly, he heard another explosion, very close. The stairs he was standing on suddenly broke apart, nearly causing him to fall off the city wall. Faintly, he could hear the chaotic commotion of people and horses falling from the city gate. It seemed as if some soldiers were shouting at the top of their lungs, "Run for your lives! They've breached the city gate." If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 446 to turn defensive. The continuous bombardment that lasted for half an hour made the Northern Army, which was deployed outside the city and ready to attack at any time, very angry. How long will these artillerymen continue to bombard? Dave couldn't help stamping his feet and cursing in a low voice while Commander Pierce walked away. They have blown the city walls into sieves, and you are still not satisfied. Even the usually steady Vaughn couldn't help frowning and said, "If they continue to bombard, I'm afraid the entire section of the city wall will collapse directly." "Do we still have to climb the collapsed ruins to enter the city?" Wayne glanced around and whispered in the ears of his two close comrades. "Before the battle, I heard the order from the city lord and the commander to launch a deterrence offensive first. I guess this is why those guys in the artillery battalion are wasting artillery shells so unscrupulously." Dave glared and said, "What kind of deterrence is it to just bombard the city walls? At most, the explosion will kill a few hundred city defenders." The ironclad ships fired solid shells, which had a significant destructive effect on fixed defense facilities such as city walls and gates, but were far less lethal to the enemy than shrapnel shells. But Harvey's goal wasn't to immediately and remotely strangle the vast majority of the royal capital's soldiers guarding the city walls at the outset of the battle. His objective was simply to destroy the defensive forces stationed on the walls, creating a safe passage for the subsequent deterrent offensive. 3 airships took off from Fingigan City 3 days after the fleet, yet managed to arrive in the royal capital almost simultaneously. This was Harvey's attempt to put the aircraft into actual combat and observe their effectiveness. Suddenly, almost everyone, both enemy and ally, witnessed the massive vehicle slowly emerging from the thick clouds, 3 each equipped with 8 separate airbags, their pods equipped with mana-powered machine guns that could be flexibly rotated and fired, and mounts capable of releasing mana-explosive bombs at any moment. This was Spark City's newly developed, upgraded version of the airship, the Combat Airship Type 1. Harvey envisioned the unhindered airships as the ultimate trump card in large-scale warfare. Even if intercepted by high-ranking flying priests or spellcasters, the pods mounted machine guns and several infallible snipers could counterattack. The mana rifles had no casting interval, and the soldiers didn't need to expend vast amounts of mana and divine power to maintain their flight, unlike spellcasters and priests. Control of the air meant the key to victory. The ironclad ships at the docks and the Northern Army outside the city erupted in roaring cheers. Everyone knew the wonders of the airships. The capital was powerless to stop the attacks from above, and the balance of power had completely tilted in their favor. Soon, the airship slowly and leisurely passed over the towering city walls, drifting through the outer city, dotted with low, dilapidated buildings, and directly over the royal court. However, they did not underestimate the enemy and maintained a high altitude. The entire vast Jinhu city was in full view. The once magnificent royal court, built high above the inner city, now looked only the size of a palm. Standing in the gondola of an airship, Tommy pulled out a crystal windproof goggle from his pocket, fastened it to his eyes, and with a sniper rifle slung from his back, he aimed a sly grin at 3 figures flying out of the royal court below. They were court mages of noble birth. Empowered by his high-level bloodline's weakness insight, the high-caliber magic bullets instantly pierced the protective shield of a high-level court mage, tearing off a fist-sized piece of flesh from his waist. Without even a groan, the high-level mage plummeted from the sky. Another spellcaster quickly turned back to attempt to rescue, only to be met with the same long-range attack. Fortunately, he seemed to be equipped with some powerful defensive device, instantly creating several layers of transparent, crystal-like shields around his body, barely blocking the airship's attack. However, the opponent seemed to have no time to rest his spells. After missing one strike, he paused for only a few seconds before striking again. What shocked the court mage was that, despite the distance, the 2 attacks hit the shield in almost the same spot, with pinpoint accuracy. With a snap, the mage's armband shattered instantly. While the device was broken, It managed to block the second attack, but the strange attack also damaged the court mage's magical energy, causing his magical energy to temporarily stagnate and nearly tumble to the ground. The last spellcaster to escape the attack quickly grabbed hold of his companion, looking up at the airship in the distance with a look of panic. Then, with a complicated look, he cast a veiled glance at his fellow mage, who lay in a bloody mess on the ground below. They possess such strange and powerful long-range attacks. There's no need to fight them to the death. Remember, we're spellcasters just like them. The injured mage naturally noticed the massive emblems of the Union and the Northern Lords painted on the airship. He gritted his teeth and nodded, saying, "True. Spellcasters don't need to fight to the death unless it's a battle over the path of truth. Besides, I don't want to work for that damn church anyway. Let's go." With that, the two of them flew off in the opposite direction, out of the city, without hesitation. Tommy smiled as he sheathed his sniper rifle and raised his hand to stop his sharpshooter from firing from behind. He scoffed, "They're quite good at assessing the situation and not rushing in to fight us head-on. Otherwise, we wouldn't have the upper hands in close combat." However, this brief exchange of fire left Tommy with a sigh of regret. It turns out not every spellcaster is as wise and compassionate as his lord, nor as magnanimous as Duncan, the Eye of Illusion, and the astrologer, who treat everyone with equality and have the courage to explore the unknown. They're even less capable than the sullen necromancers of the Academy, who fought side by side with ordinary mortal soldiers without reservation. The three airships hovered in the sky for a moment, waiting. They were stunned to find that in the vast city of Jinhu, the only noble spellcasters who dared to stand up to them and defend the royal city were the three who had just died and the other injured. They couldn't help but laugh. Tommy immediately pulled out his magic brain device and reported the situation to Harvey. After receiving his response, he gestured to the soldier in charge. The soldier nodded in understanding, and the airship immediately lowered its altitude. The bombardier expertly loaded the magic explosive bomb into the launch port and immediately triggered the trigger. With a click, a massive bomb detached from the bracket at the bottom of the pod and plummeted to the ground. Their first mission was a crucial part of the deterrence offensive, bombing the royal court of Jinhu City. Chapter 447, The Crushing of Public Opinion. Using a floating airship to drop a magical bomb was a primitive form of aerial attack, but it was a far superior method to the previous one where the shapeshifter Duncan transformed himself into a griffin and used it as a human bomber. In this realm of the sky, accessible only to high-level transcendence, it was a truly groundbreaking superweapon. Of the three floating airships, only Tommy, the primary one, was responsible for carrying and dropping the bombs. The other two primarily served as cover and support, guarding against possible attacks from high-level spellcasters. As the magical bombs plummeted into the air, the primary airship, hovering over 100 meters above the palace, could clearly see the terrified eyes of the guards and knights on the palace walls. Many raised their crossbows and fired futilely, but ordinary weapons simply couldn't reach the airship's height. The bomb struck the dome of the palace's council hall with pinpoint accuracy. With a resounding explosion, a crimson fireball erupted, quickly rising into the air in a thick cloud of dust. The entire council hall was engulfed in flames, and the magnificent architectural decorations meticulously constructed and carved by the palace's craftsmen were shattered by the blast. The blast swept through the surrounding area, and the searing flames quickly spread to the palace gardens adjacent to the council hall. For a moment, the entire palace was filled with thick smoke and raging flames. The nobles, guards, and attendants fled in all directions. Many realized that the high palace walls effectively blocked the flames, so they crowded through the now unguarded palace gates and fled for their lives. Immediately afterwards, the airship slowly drifted over St. Valen's Cathedral of Radiance. To their surprise, only a single high-ranking priest from the cathedral flew out to meet the enemy. Presumably the Church of St. Valen had dispatched its main force to the border of Danius to confront the Federation. This priest, seemingly not a combat veteran, was locked on by several long-range sniper rifles aboard the airship within a few dozen meters of the air. 3 precise shots followed, and his body erupted in a cloud of blood, slamming directly into the cathedral's main hall. The cathedral's doors also flung open, and a vast crowd of believers and lower-ranking priests poured out like frightened birds. The airship's attack on the palace had been witnessed by nearly the entire city, and remaining inside the cathedral now was clearly courting death. With a resounding boom, the renowned Cathedral of Radiance in Central Europe was reduced to rubble by the terrifying magical technology. The city walls have completely collapsed, Pierce, riding a magic car, quickly arrived at the flagship on the riverbank and reported the battle progress to Harvey in person. Standing up, he tilted his head slightly, his gaze etched with a complex expression as he gazed at the two plumes of smoke rising from the inner city in the distance. He asked in confusion, "Sir, why do you only allow us to control the two southwestern sections of the wall and parts of the outer city? Our real enemies, the royal nobles, the church, and the royal court, are all within the inner city. Sending only a few airships into the inner city to bombard the palace and church wouldn't seem to be enough to completely capture the city." Harvey chuckled. "Do you know how many nobles there are in the royal city? Not counting the numerous court nobles without hereditary fiefs and fiefdoms, there are probably hundreds of hereditary nobles holding fiefdoms of all sizes around Jinhu City alone. Jinhu City, a massive city in St. Valen and even in the central southern region, is home to nearly 30,000 people. It was almost catching up to the rapidly expanding population of Spark City. And we only have a mere 3,000 soldiers. Deploying this small force into the densely populated capital, we'd easily get bogged down. After all, in the eyes of the locals of Golden Glory City, these northerners were effectively invaders. Moreover, upon their arrival, they had already unleashed two earth-shattering firecrackers within the inner city, leaving everyone terrified of the prospect of such a sudden, devastating attack. Therefore, Harvey had prepared for both scenarios from the outset regarding the conquest of the city. The three airships weren't all dedicated to bombing missions. The two other airships, in addition to the main ones, were also equipped with tens of thousands of public opinion warfare weapons. As the shadows of the airships passed over the city, the terrified and despairing citizens were stunned to see countless pieces of paper falling lightly like snowflakes. As the most prosperous city in central China, the capital boasts a literacy rate far exceeding that of ordinary towns and villages. Many educated vendors and citizens grasped the snow-white paper that fell from the sky, discovering bold handwriting, printed in bulk using the costly alchemical printing press. People of Golden Radiant City, I am Harvey Floyd, the mayor of Spark City in the northern borderlands. As the initiator of this war, my goal is clear: to overthrow the Church of Light's corrupt rule and ignorant beliefs within the country, and to clear the accusations that the spellcaster spread the plague and assassinated the Grand Duke. To prevent the harm of war from affecting the ordinary citizens of the city, I promise not to send soldiers directly into battle within the city. Instead, I will dispatch my warships daily directly to the inner city palace, carrying out precise strikes against targets until the church and the royal court surrender. After the war, I will completely reduce all unwarranted taxes levied on the people of the capital, completely abolishing the city entrance tax, the poll tax, the adultery tax, the marriage tax, and completely exempting the people from labor conscription. Before then, please refrain from traveling near the inner city palace and the Cathedral of Glory, lest you be harmed by the attack. What does this mean? Many literate citizens, after reading the contents of the slip of paper, froze in shock. On a gallows platform at a crossroads in the outer city, a man dressed as a local civilian stood atop it, clutching a stack of slips of paper that had fallen from the sky and preaching at the top of his lungs. Everyone listen to me. Come and see what the Northern Lord said. He said that he would not send those barbaric soldiers from the north into the city to fight, but would only let his terrifying weapons that can fly in the sky directly attack the palace and the church. He said that after the war, he will exempt all the nobles from the taxes previously imposed, and will no longer recruit the people to work for the nobles for free. We don't have to worry about being summoned to the battlefield on the border. What if it's just a lie made up by those northern barbarians to buy people's hearts? I think it's believable. After the city gate was breached, those ferocious black-clad soldiers really only occupied the area near the city wall and did not rush into the city to burn, kill and loot. Yes, I sneaked close to the city wall, and those soldiers just warned me to leave quickly. God, I almost thought I was going to be killed by them. More and more people gathered in the audience and talked a lot. Although many people were illiterate, they could still understand the simple and easy-to-understand words. Compared to the dispute between the spellcaster and the church, the promise that His Majesty, after being seriously wounded, would no longer arbitrarily impose taxes or impose forced labor upon the people, was what truly captivated them. Meanwhile, such public announcements were being made in nearly every densely populated area of the outer city, and soon the ordinary people living in the outer city of the royal capital had learned of the news to some degree. Many couldn't help but harbor a faint hope: those powerful people in the royal palace would simply surrender quickly. Chapter 448 Desperate Bait. My hometown is in Base Town, less than a half-day's journey from the capital. Seriously, Benny, his meticulously maintained pneumona rifle slung across his back, followed his fellow soldiers on patrol along the inner base of the city wall. The leading team leader, a typical northerner, tilted his head and chuckled, "Tisk, tisk, tisk, so, you're from the capital too." Everyone laughed in unison, good-naturedly teasing Benny, a new recruit on his first expedition. "What's so funny? Base Town's specialty is sea bass. You haven't tasted the plumpest sea bass and wild hazel mushroom stew in summer," Benny explained seriously, pouting. The team could hear the sound of swallowing saliva several times. "Bass and mushroom stew? It makes me miss the taste of the glacial salmon in my hometown. It's a pity that we can only eat it in winter." The comrade walking behind Benny poked him on the back. "Benny, do you have relatives in your hometown?" Benny's expression darkened, and he muttered softly, "Half of the people in Base Town were infected with a disease, and half of them fled like me. My family couldn't hold on the road, and I was the only one who made it to the north." The team leader coughed twice and changed the subject. "Okay, we are approaching the outer city residential area. According to the agreement, we can't patrol forward anymore. Let's prepare to turn around and go back." Everyone stopped and was about to turn around and line up to leave, when suddenly a surprised shout came from the street not far away. "Oh my God. Is it Benny?" Benny instinctively turned and spotted a short, stocky young man with a striking mop of curly, reddish-brown hair among a group of laborers pushing carts and carrying goods on the street ahead. "Dave. Oh my God. It's Dave. I thought you died fleeing," he exclaimed in delight, but his body, as if possessed by muscle memory, stood still, his fingers even gripping the sling of his rifle, ready to swiftly unleash and fire at any moment. "This is Dave, my friend from Base Town, whom I grew up with," Benny explained briefly to his comrades and squad leader. The squad leader nodded. "You'll have 5 minutes to catch up. Don't cross the street, and don't let your guard down." The two childhood friends, across the street from each other, quickly and excitedly recounted their experiences and recent events. Benny and Dave then reluctantly said goodbye, agreeing to meet again on his next patrol. Dave and the others also knew that these northern soldiers had promised not to enter the city. Looking at their backs as they lined up to leave, they boasted to the people around them, "Look, these soldiers from the north are not barbarians. Among them is my friend Benny, who is a native of Base Town." The leather shop clerk in the same team whispered enviously, "Look at their clothes. Although they don't have shiny armor like the knights, they are all made of fine cotton cloth. And those boots, tisk tisk tisk, they are deerskin boots that only noble lords can afford." These soldiers from the north seemed to be treated better than the guards in the Grand Duke's court. On the second day after the northern army occupied the city wall, the airship flew above the palace again. This time, 2 magic explosive bombs were dropped, which raised a section of the palace wall and the gate to the ground in an instant. "Your Excellency, Prime Minister. The northerners have occupied the 2 southwestern gates of the outer city. We still have the chance to escape from the northeast," the Minister of State urged anxiously. "If we don't leave now, it will be too late when they completely block the 4 city gates." Chief Knight Dickinson pressed one hand on the hilt of his sword, glared at the Minister of State and the Prime Minister, and snorted coldly, "Your Majesty is seriously injured and unconscious." The Archbishop encountered an explosion after returning to the glorious church. He hasn't found anyone until now. "Are you going to abandon the capital and flee without a fight?" The gray-haired Prime Minister curled his lips. "Flee without a fight? Tell me, facing such an enemy, how can we fight? Haven't you seen enough of their horrific methods on the city wall? If you want to leave, you must send His Majesty away first." The Chief Knight gritted his teeth and said, "Send His Majesty to the border. The headquarters of the Church's Inquisition army and the Noble Coalition are still safe for the time being. We stay to cover His Majesty's whereabouts and delay the pursuers, waiting for the reinforcements promised by the Church to arrive, and then we will counterattack." The Minister of State trembled. "How can Your Majesty send him away? If the Church's priests don't use healing magic to keep him alive every 7 days, he'll be nothing but a corpse when he's sent to the border." But now even the Archbishop has disappeared in the church bombing. Where can we find the surviving officiating priest? And those northern enemies seem unfazed by the holy city's reinforcements. They've surrounded the capital and controlled the outer city. Daily, they dispatch their terrifying flying vehicles directly to the royal court, dropping devastating weapons before slowly returning. And then there's the paper that keeps raining down on the city. The war isn't over yet, and they're already trying to win over the hearts and minds of the people. co-opting the foolish and despicable common people. Two more violent explosions echoed in the distance. The dignitaries were currently taking refuge in a wealthy merchant's mansion not far from the palace, so it wouldn't be a target for the airships. After bombing the palace and the church, what else are they planning to bomb today? The explosions must have occurred to the east, the building's window frames rattling, indicating they were not far away. A guard entered trembling with fear and reported, "My lords, what was destroyed was the headquarters of the Royal City Knights." The Royal City Knights had been fully deployed to the border battlefield. The enemy's move was merely a show of force and a threat, but they could only watch helplessly, daring not to raise a single thought of resistance. The enemy's attack was so swift that no one expected their sudden arrival at the city walls. Spring plowing had just concluded, and crops were in the crucial period of growth, and the capital's nearby militia was scarce. With the city gates breached, the capital's only remaining defenses, the Royal City Guards, over 3,000 strong, fled in an instant, opening the two northeastern gates and desperately fleeing. Fewer than 200 court knights and noble guards remained, commanded by the chief knight, guarding Grand Duke St. Valen, who had been taken to a wealthy merchant's mansion for safety. Dickinson knew full well that the Prime Minister and the State Secretary would likely not be here again after tonight, abandoning the gravely wounded Majesty and secretly fleeing the capital. He turned and left the room, raised his hand to summon a trusted knight, and whispered, "Move His Majesty from the second-floor bedroom to the basement. The door must be guarded at all times. Wait 7 more days." The chief knight knew that if the church reinforcements from the Holy City hadn't arrived after 7 days, for the sake of His Majesty's life, he would have no choice but to surrender humiliatingly in exchange for the spellcaster's rescue. This war was an unprovoked one. The Northern Lord's true purpose was to use the Grand Duke and the capital as bait, encircling and attacking the reinforcements to lure out and intercept the church's distant reinforcements. Chapter 449, Encirclement and Attack. Harvey besieged Jinhu City without attacking it, holding only the southwestern gates near the Ralph River and controlling the outer civilian areas, which comprised 2/3 of the capital. His goal was to siege the city and attack its reinforcements. After nearly a week of military blockade and continuous bombing, most of the important buildings in the inner city, including the Royal Palace, suffered devastating damage: the palace, the cathedral, the Knights' quarters, the Prime Minister's residence. When the bombing reached the capital's dignitaries, they finally gave up. At this point, the church's reinforcements are still lingering, and the lords of the border counties have refused to send troops to rescue the capital. The pot-bellied earl paced back and forth beside the Grand Duke's bedside, saying gravely, "If we continue to refuse to surrender, sooner or later they will bomb this prosperous city into ruins, piece by piece." It was rumored that the Prime Minister and the State Secretary had secretly left the city last night, presumably seeking refuge in the neighboring Duchy of Berkeley. When spellcasters were being expelled and captured, they were the first to publicly stand up for the church, fearing a reckoning even more than the more fenced nobles. Chief Knight Dickinson pursed his lips, one hand loosely gripping the hilt of the sword slung at his waist. He stood silently in the cramped, dark basement. The conditions were somewhat harsh, but at least it was safe, less vulnerable to aerial bombardment. He had been staying by His Majesty's side for the past few days, guarding against the restless nobles of the capital who might attempt to abduct the unconscious Grand Duke and present him as a captive to the Northern Territory Lord. These men, always wavering in their stance and always driven by profit, would have no shame in betraying their master for personal gain. Even if they surrendered, they could not allow His Majesty to become a bargaining chip for their own gains. The Earl patiently persuaded him a few more times, and said to the unmoved Chief Knight with some impatience, "Your Majesty is seriously injured and unconscious and unable to manage affairs, and he has no queen or designated successor. Among the powerful ministers who are still staying in the royal capital, I, the Earl of the Palace, have the highest status. As Your Majesty's Chief Knight, you should obey my instructions." He paused and whispered to Dickinson, "Other nobles may have some thoughts of currying favor with the Northern Lord and seeking credit, but I won't. Dickinson, don't forget, I am also Your Majesty's uncle." When he insisted on turning to the church completely, I was the only one who stood up to oppose it in the council hall. The Chief Knight opened his mouth, but could not say anything. Indeed, letting the Earl of the Palace, whose family has produced several spellcasters, surrender on behalf of His Majesty might even be able to pray for the other party's generous rescue. His grip on the hilt loosened, and he was about to open his mouth to agree when the basement door suddenly flung open from the outside. "Your Excellency, Lord Dickinson, reinforcements from the church have arrived." "What? Reinforcements from the Holy City? How many troops are there? Are they the Inquisition from Goris?" "Where are they now?" the Earl and Dickinson demanded anxiously at the same time. The attendant in charge of the communication took a breath and said in a deep voice, "It's the Inquisition of Isengert's shining spear." They suddenly appeared directly behind the enemy in the southwest, carrying the flags of Isengert and the church. "It couldn't be more conspicuous," the attendant paused and continued, "We estimate there are nearly 3,000 troops, all armored Inquisition knights, without priests or retinues. They must have arrived by forced cavalry." It seemed that the church valued St. Valen, the main base for the spread of the faith. "What about the enemies in the north? How have they reacted?" the Earl continued, his eyes wide open. The attendant shook his head, a look of bewilderment on his face. "They've actually abandoned the already captured city walls and marched out into the open, seemingly preparing for a head-on confrontation with the Inquisition." Were the Northerner mad? Or had the Mage Lord's mind been overtaken by magic? A group of mortal soldiers, unarmored, facing off against the blood-given Knights of Inquisition on the plains? Even if their ironclad ships boasted terrifying magical weapons and flying devices capable of soaring and bombing the ground, they would likely be completely useless against the swift and agile cavalry. Once the Knights charged into the infantry positions, it would be a one-sided massacre. A complete victory for the church would not only drive the northern lords from the vicinity of the capital, but might even significantly weaken their opponent's strength. After all, with over a dozen ironclad warships and over 3,000 elite soldiers, I'm sure they've gone all in, risking everything. He glanced sideways at the Earl with a complex expression and said slowly, "It seems we'll have to wait until this battle is over before making a final decision." Harvey, under Pierce's leadership, personally led a group of northern officers on a rare inspection of the battlefield. Long before entering the capital, they had dug numerous trenches and bunkers in the open space outside the city. The crisscrossing trenches almost covered the entire perimeter of the city walls. These trenches were primarily intended to protect against possible spellcasters among the enemy, as well as spear attacks from the bloodline-gifted Knights of the Judgment Army. According to combat readiness requirements, the trench lines were divided into several lines, each 50 meters apart. Vertical evacuation tunnels were built between the horizontal trenches, allowing soldiers to move freely, providing perfect cover for both retreat and advance. The ground was covered with spiked wooden stakes and strewn with caltrops. These were the suggestions of the young, newly appointed officers of the general staff. Many of them came from hereditary noble families and knightly families, their grandfathers having earned their titles and fortunes on horseback. They possessed a wealth of family experience and training in dealing with their own people. While the Church's Inquisition Knights were transcendent beings with awakened bloodline talents, their mounts were still ordinary war horses. A collision with a barricade or a pit would still throw the Knights off their backs. To prevent the enemy from dispersing, a tactic of rapid, individual breakthroughs was employed. Half-buried bunkers were placed at intervals throughout the horizontal trenches, housing the most powerful magical machine guns. These, in conjunction with the ordinary soldiers in the trenches, formed a crossfire network of both fast and slow attacks, both near and far. Behind the three trenches stood an artillery emplacement, 20 mana-powered cannons arrayed in a row. These coordinated with ship-borne mana cannons anchored in the river a mile to the side of the battlefield, carrying out long-range strikes. The only force remaining on the city walls was the Northern Army's sniper battalion, led by City Lord Harvey's top sharpshooter, Tommy. These snipers were tasked with accurately targeting and suppressing those higher-ranking Judgment Knights whose extraordinary strength was too overpowering, preventing them from charging into the positions without regard for casualties and inflicting damage on soldiers or officers in a mutually assured destruction. After all, many trainee staff officers and political advisors would also be deployed on the front lines. The loss of even one of these higher-ranking intellectuals would be a source of deep resentment for the military and the general staff. Chapter 450 Spear of Glory. The Lord Mayor's personal inspection of the battlefield naturally thrilled the lower-ranking soldiers and officers. They each remained firmly within their assigned combat zones, only turning to salute and puffing out their chests when Harvey passed by. "Do you consider this also a real-world combat exercise?" Pierce, having been choking back his words, finally managed to speak. Harvey smiled and retorted, "Don't you think so? It's not often that our army comes into direct confrontation with these transcendent knights with awakened bloodline talents, let alone on such a large scale. Having mastered powerful magical weaponry beyond their time, Harvey noticed a subtle arrogance emerging among his troops. Swift victory, unstoppable victory, and overwhelming strength seemed to be the hallmarks of the Northern Army. It was no wonder they were so cocky. They needed to be given a chance to fight tough opponents when necessary, so they wouldn't make irreparable mistakes by underestimating the enemy and advancing rashly when facing the invading alien enemies from the north. Compared to defending the city walls, our army is better at, and should be better at, positional warfare. Milo Mendez, the commander of the Glorious Spears, rode to the edge of the camp with a sullen face, gazing out at the enemy positions outside the city. Lord Mendez, the enemy has indeed sent their aerial devices towards us, a personal guard reported, riding closer. But after noticing we deployed our alchemical magic-breaking crossbows, they decisively turned and fled. Mendez scoffed and spoke slowly. That Mage Lord must have alchemists working under him. They know full well that the magic-breaking crossbows can reach hundreds of meters, even wiping out enemies in the air. They had a notable record of using magic-breaking crossbows to defeat high-ranking mages using flight spells in the past. If the situation wasn't urgent and they needed quick support, with sufficient combat priests, the Glorious Spears could even suppress those levitation devices, allowing the high-ranking priests to gain control of the air. The accompanying deputy whispered, "Our base is separated from the riverbank by a dense high-slope forest. The enemy's long-range magic weapons can't hit us, but it's strange that they actually voluntarily gave up the towering city walls they had occupied and lined up a defensive formation outside the city. How can they confront us head-on without even knights, the Spear of Annihilation?" Mendez snorted coldly, and waved his hand for his attendant to bring up a strange metal iron pipe that was completely silver but accidentally broken into two pieces. He weighed it in his hand and said, "This Northern Lord and the Alchemy Exploration Society jointly provided this new magic weapon to the Federation, which made the Black Rock City Mage Corps invincible when facing the demon soldiers. As the source of weapons research and development and manufacturing, these pagans in the north naturally possessed magic weapons of the same power." The Legion commander pointed to the shields each Inquisition knight carried on their backs and said, "We've already devised effective countermeasures. These protective shields, forged in Isengard, are infused with glowstone powder on each side, effectively defending against the Lance of Oblivion." Glowstone powder? The kind that can create magical artifacts to suppress spellcasters. Mendez nodded. Indeed. The Holy City's conclave of mechanics has largely cracked the Lance of Oblivion secrets. While the crucial magical bow and arrows remain unreplicable, they do know how to defend against and counter them. Glowstone is mined only in the Holy City of Garth and the nearby Isengard mines, so the output is modest. Therefore, each shield is only the size of a breastplate, but it's sufficient to protect the Inquisition knights' heads and chests, the most vulnerable areas. Even if damage to other parts of the body is sustained, the Bloodline's power will not significantly affect their combat capabilities. Having destroyed the enemy's greatest source of strength, once the Inquisition knights launched their charge, their defeat was inevitable. Mendez gazed at the enemy positions outside the city gates, chuckling inwardly. If these pagans hadn't been so arrogant, and had taken advantage of the fatigue of the Spears of Light as they arrived outside Golden Radiant City, launching a surprise attack with their long-range magic weapons and levitating vehicles, there might have been a chance of victory. But they chose to abandon their defenses of the city walls, instead marching out of the city and forming a battle formation in an attempt to confront the Inquisition head-on. What a bunch of fools. After listening to the information provided by the soldiers on the airship, Pierce frowned in confusion. "Shield? They planned to use this thing to resist our magic guns and cannons," Harvey interrupted. "How big a shield? A heavily armored knight is already the limit of what a warhorse can bear. If they have to carry a huge shield on their back, unless they ride monsters to fight like the demon soldiers, the horses will not be able to move at all." Tommy was also confused, but still answered honestly, "It's a small hand shield, the size of a wash basin, barely enough to cover the head and face. To be honest, I think they are out of their minds. Are you sure there are no combat priests and healing priests in the Judgment Army? It is basically certain that priests can't wear such heavy armor. They are as thin as bamboo poles like spellcasters and can be blown down by the wind." Tommy realized his slip of the tongue as soon as he said it, and hurriedly bowed to the city lord to apologize under the angry gaze of Commander Pierce. Harvey waved his hands, not wanting to pay attention to him. "It's probably a protective shield made by the church. Either some defensive spells have been applied to it, or some magical minerals have been mixed in to make the shield stronger. In short, it's useless. The penetrating power of the magic gun's bullets cannot be resisted by mere defensive spells and enchanted metals, unless these thousands of knights of the Judgment Army can all receive the high-level treatment of Duke Ralph himself, and let the Cardinal of the Church personally make defensive talismans for them. Even if bullets can't penetrate, the shields can only protect the head and face at best. Once the hail of mono-machine gun bullets washes over them like water, haha, the worst that these Judgment Knights will end up with is a relatively intact head. Their real concern right now was that the enemy's over 3,000 elite Transcendent Knights wouldn't employ conventional cavalry mass charges, but instead employed a ranger-style, dispersed, and flexible assault. This would eliminate their greatest firepower, their artillery. Machine gun bunkers weren't completely blind-spotted, and a reckless charge could easily evade these heavy fire points. The soldiers would then be forced to hold their positions under immense pressure, despite the Transcendent Knights' interspersed charges. This was a must-test Harvey presented to his officers and soldiers, a test they must face and endure. End of this chapter. Thank you so much for reading until the end. Don't forget to give it a like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription or donation encourages us to continue. Thank you all. See you in the next video.